who, this doesn't appear to make sense, but this asks you to look after their interests, Mr. Mayor, the million EU citizens who are here. Thank you very much. And it's now time for the Assembly to note the recommendation set out at item 2 in relation to pecuniary interests. Are there any? No. Thanks very much. Will you please receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 28th of July to the 31st of August 2017? Thank you very much. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes on matters occurring since the publication of his report.
Morning, Deputy Chairman, Assembly members, and to all members of the public, particularly the students from New York, and to those bus drivers at City Hall this morning. I want to thank the London Assembly for their Driven to Distraction report and to thank Unite for sharing their London Bus Driver Bill of Rights. TfL will be publishing its formal response to the London Assembly report at the end of October. TfL are taking comprehensive action to improve bus safety. We need to build on TfL's existing bus safety programme, and I've announced further plans to test new safety technology on London's buses. TfL will provide bus driver bespoke training for all new drivers, including safety incentives and contracts, and provide greater transparency on bus collision investigations. I've asked TfL to ensure they look at the concerns raised in the Bill of Rights and continue to work to improve bus safety for all Londoners, including facilities and working conditions for London's bus drivers. Deputy Chairman, as part of my plans to clean up London's air, I have today written to senior figures at leading broadcasters such as BBC London, ITV London and LBC to ask them to include updates on the quality of London's air during their news bulletins and weather reports. This could then be coordinated with the existing citywide alert system. Broadcasters are already doing excellent work in covering the threat to public health posed by the capital's filthy air, and I'm now asking them to go even further and help empower Londoners to reduce their exposure to harmful pollution. Last week, I was delighted to publish my first draft housing strategy for London. One of the key components of my strategy is to make £250 million available for City Hall to buy and prepare land for new and affordable housing. The draft housing strategy provides a plan to address the housing crisis over the next few years. This includes starting to build 90,000 new affordable homes by 2021, ensuring a better deal for private renters, increasing the building of more genuinely affordable homes, supporting new housing providers, including community builders, and helping tackle homelessness with a way off the street for every rough sleeper. I've been clear that solving the capital's housing crisis will be a marathon, not a sprint, and the strategy sets out how I intend to use my current powers and resources to their fullest extent. The government also needs to provide a comprehensive and urgent devolution of funding and powers that recognises the scale of the challenge. The draft strategy is now out for a 3-month consultation, and I want as many Londoners as possible to let me know their views on how we can improve housing in London. To contribute to help solve the housing crisis, I've also called on the government to allow London's boroughs to increase council tax bills for high-value homes that are left empty. Last week, Deputy Chair, I met with the Chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, Lord Andrew Adonis, where I outlined my view that the UK needs a major increase in infrastructure spending in the aftermath of Brexit. I believe that infrastructure investment should not be seen as a zero-sum game where one region of the UK loses out to another. Indeed, all parts of the UK will need to see an increase in transport and infrastructure investment in order to support growth and job creation as Britain exits the European Union. And finally, I'm pleased to announce that a year on from its launch, more than 100 million journeys have been made using my hopper fare, and around 325,000 journeys are now being made every weekday. And I've got one request for an oral update, Deputy Chairman.
Yes, you do.
It's from Assembly Member Boff on the Olympic Stadium. Newham Council has made clear that the investment has not been written off. Rather, the loan from the Council to Newham Legacy Investments Limited has been impaired in its draft accounts. The impairment was documented in Newham's draft accounts, which were published for public consultation on the 3rd of July. In this case, the impairment can always be reversed if the financial performance of the stadium improves. My understanding is this is a technical accountancy term to flag an investment that could be at risk due to the recently reported financial problems faced by the London Stadium. This is a 40-year loan, and this is its first year of operation. It was widely anticipated that the first year of trading would be particularly challenging. As I've said previously, the deals done before I became mayor have left significant risks to the taxpayers of London. That is why I ordered an independent review into London Stadium last year, which will be reporting shortly. I'll be working with the London Legacy Development Corporation, Newham Council, and other stadium partners on a range of options to improve the financial performance of the stadium. It's worth remembering that throughout the summer there have been a number of hugely popular events, including 3 major concerts and the World Championship of Athletics and the Para-Athletics hosted at the stadium, which have been enjoyed by thousands of Londoners and others from around the globe.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Questions on the Mayor's oral update? Assembly Member Devonish.
Good morning, Mr Mayor.
Morning.
You made my morning last Mayor's question for the first time ever when you agreed cross-party to hold a meeting on tube noise. I'm really having trouble getting my office to get a date in the diary of the Deputy Mayor or yourself to hold that meeting with Assembly members across here and residents. Can you please chase it up?
I'll do that, Deputy Chair, through you.
Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Both.
Good morning, Mr Mayor. You stated in your oral update that you are concerned about the financial situation of the stadium. Can you tell me when the report that you commissioned will be published?
I expect the next few weeks, with a good wind, I'm confident in the next few weeks. I used the word shortly in my answer, but I think the next few weeks is being realistic.
There was an undertaking at the time that it should report by the end of the summer. That's, I googled that yesterday, 22nd of September. Are we going to get that by the 22nd of September?
I think many of us will think summer's gone,
Well, now would be fine.
I think that's a fair challenge for me, but there or thereabouts.
Have you seen a draft report, Mr. Mayor?
No, I haven't.
There was, according to the director's direction, the director's decision, they were supposed to have reported back by June.
You sure? I've not seen a report.
Doesn't that concern you, Mr. Mayor?
No, I mean, I do many things, and often things only cross my desk when the report's finalised. There could well be a draft in existence. I'm not saying there isn't, but I've not seen a draft or the report.
Okay. Why is it that you think that Newham think that they're not going to see a return on their £40 million taxpayer investment?
Well, my understanding is that the impairment is a accountancy term to flag an investment at risk, and it's no secret, you'll be aware from discussions we've had previously at MQTs and during committee meetings of the concerns there are around the stadium. I've expressed some of them, not just the cost, not just the terms of agreement with West Ham, but actually each year it costs £8 million to move the chairs around. And so I suspect all those things are some of the things contributing to Newham Council putting the impairment on the loan.
Do you think that perhaps Newham should have considered what effect the adaptations, the cost of the adaptations, when it decided to come forward with that taxpayer's subsidy?
I'm unclear of the things that went on before I became mayor. One of the reasons why we've had the review is to look at what happened previously, but also to learn lessons going forward. We don't simply want a backwards-looking report, but some lessons going forward. I think my understanding is, without seeing the report, that nobody foresaw an annual cost of about £8 million to rotate the chairs from a football stadium to a music concert / athletics / other sporting event.
Newham have said that they're working with the GLA and the London Legacy Development Corporation in order to resolve some of the performance issues, financial performance issues of the stadium. Have they had a meeting with you?
Yeah, I met recently with the Mayor of Newham, Sir Robin Wells, and I know my Chief of Staff has had regular contact with senior people at Newham. Separately, I also know that LLDC, which exists of a number of different leaders, have discussed some of the issues that I think have been raised by Newham publicly.
Mr Mayor, the £40 million went to 44 million by some estimates, went towards supporting a company, ultimately to the E20 Stadium company, in order to manage the stadium. In 2016, that company made a loss of £105 million. Does that concern you?
Yes, it does. One of the reasons why we asked for the review, and I know some members of the Assembly don't like reviews, but it's because we need to get to the bottom of that, because it is a source of concern. It should be a source of concern for all London taxpayers.
Some Assembly members, of course, have called for reviews for about, I don't know, 8 years, I think. How close is the E20 company to complete financial collapse?
I think there's probably a discussion to be had about whether the financial problems, the financial situation that you refer to, could lead to that arising. I'm hoping it doesn't. I think there is a school of thought, and I think I subscribe to this. There needs to be clarity about running the stadium. At the moment, I think even if you spoke to Newham, they'd say that there are concerns around the management of the stadium, because the way the partnership works is there are a number of different people involved in the partnership. And I think when it comes to doing a deal with external partners, let's say, for example, naming rights, that lack of clarity can lead to confusion. And that's one of the issues that I'm hoping will come out of the review and discussions with the Newham Council. But it's got to be an agreement. I can't unilaterally do that.
Will the review be looking at the fact that a lot of people on the LLDC board are also on the E20 board?
Well, the review will look at a whole host of issues, and I'm sure one of the things that will be covered is the constitution/composition of those who run the stadium. The main part of the review, though, is to explain, so all of us can understand why the costs of the stadium exceeded now £700 million, how it is that a stadium was built, where it costs £8 million each year to change the seats, but also, more importantly as far as I'm concerned, how we can reduce the cost to the taxpayer, so in years to come we aren't subsidising the London Stadium.
How close are we to the LLDC being into complete financial collapse?
I'm not sure about financial collapse. I'm quite keen at some stage in the medium term, I think it's raised at last MQTs, to no longer need an LLDC. So there's a huge amount of work that LLDC needs to do in the short term. We now have a new chair, and I'm looking forward to the work they're doing there. The LLDCs, I'm confident they'll do good work going forward in the short term, but I'd hope to see in the next few years LLDC no longer needing to exist, and us giving back to some of the councils some of the responsibilities LLDC currently have, and some of those may well rest here in City Hall.
Finally, Mr Mayor, in order to be a bit circular perhaps, you've today given an undertaking that within weeks we will see the report that has been commissioned, despite the fact that you have not seen a draft of that report. Are we clear on that?
Yeah, let me be clear. My expectation is that I'll see a final report from those who are asked to do the review in the next few weeks, and my intention is to make that public.
Right. Well, for now, Mr Mayor, on that subject, I look forward to that report, because I, as you may know, am very concerned about the whole of the Olympic Stadium project. Can I, Mr Chair, move on to the Mayor updated on the housing?
If it's related to the Mayor's update, yes, of course.
Mr Mayor, you mentioned that you released your housing strategy.
Yeah.
And you've identified a £250 million fund enable you to purchase land. Where is that money coming from, Mr Mayor?
That's coming from our housing and land budget, so it was within the housing budget. The draft housing strategy, roughly speaking, has a budget of £4 billion. 3.15 billion of that pounds is the deal we did with central government, and the rest is within our existing account.
What is it that we will be cutting in order to spend, to allocate to this fund?
No, we're not cutting anything. I mean, there is receipts will be received, of course, from the sale of those City Hall sites that we inherited from the LDA and other organisations. And because the £250 million is a revolving sum of money, we've had a recent example in Waltham Forest where we've not just got the money back that we spent buying a piece of land, we've made a tiny bit of profit, a few £1 million of the profit. And so the idea is that £250 million will be revolving. We'll use it to assemble land, bring forward land, sell it on to, could be councils, house associations, developers, get the money back, hopefully sometimes with a decent profit, and then invest it again. So unlike the monies we secured from government, which for understandable reasons are a one-off expenditure to build affordable homes or to subsidise affordable homes, and the money's gone out, doesn't come back, the revolving fund will be money that goes out and hopefully comes back too.
Could you write to me and indicate to me where this £250 million windfall actually came from? I'm interested to know about these receipts that we've got recently. I'd like to see them. Why was the £250 million figure which you announced in the press release, why didn't it actually feature in the housing strategy itself?
In the draft housing strategy?
Yes.
The draft housing strategy does refer to the revolving fund.
Okay, I haven't got the housing strategy in front of me. If that's the case, then I'll sound wrong. But okay, I'll move on.
I can give you the reference if you want. Or
yes,
please. I'll include it in a letter if that's helpful.
Yes, please. If you can send me where that's referred to within the housing strategy. How many homes do you expect to be delivered by that £250 million fund?
It depends on the deals we can do. Give you one example of the Waltham Forest deal. That's 330 genuinely affordable homes, 100% on the site. So it depends on the deals we can do. Some will be more complicated. That's why we need the money to assemble land. Some will be straightforward. And so it depends on the deals we make with councils, HAs and developers.
So you spoke very quickly there. Did you say 230 affordable homes?
I said the deal we did in Waltham Forest was for 330 genuinely affordable homes. But obviously, the amount of homes we can get from the £250 million is contingent on the deals we do over the next few years with councils, HAs, developers.
There must be a lower baseline figure that you're looking for that 200.
No, because some of the money is to bring forward land that's currently complicated and difficult for developers to use. For example, recently on a visit to Tower Hamlets, the developers were thanking me for the loan we'd given them to bring forward housing. So some of it will be to accelerate housing, some of it will be bring together and assemble land. But it's contingent on it could be the case, for argument's sake, councils and developers and housing associations don't need support, but the idea is to use this money to bring forward land and then pass it on to councils and housing associations and developers.
Certainly, Mr Mayor, if you gave me money, I'd say thank you as well.
But you'd have to give it back with interest.
Yeah.
And share of the profits, and promise to build genuine affordable homes, and to make sure they're affordable to Londoners.
You haven't got an idea of the minimum number of homes that £250 million is going to enable?
No, it's a revolving fund. We've got a target of 90,000 starts for genuinely affordable homes by 2021. On top of that, we have the revolving fund, which will help people build the genuinely affordable homes we need. But it's monies we get back as a revolving fund.
So you must have in mind some schemes that are going to be unlocked as a result of this £250 million, and some of those schemes will have numbers of properties attached to them.
Yeah. So
what's that number that it's going to liberate? What's that number that it's going to deliver?
Well, that's something we'll determine at the time the deal was being made. And one of the things we'll be employing is, just like we've taken on board in City Hall, viability experts who have assisted in relation to more affordable homes. We'll be taking on experts in making these deals. with developers, but also to bring forward these lands. So the idea is, over the course of the next few years, we'll identify lands that currently, as you've alluded to, locked up, difficult to proceed with. There could be brownfield sites. We'll purchase those, and then we'll sell them on to a housing association, a council or a developer who will then use that to build homes. Obviously, different pieces of land will build different homes, but the idea is for there to be genuinely affordable. At least 50% should be genuinely affordable. We were very lucky with the Waltham Forest site because of the good deal we did and a good negotiation. 100% were affordable on that side.
If you build in your, as a result of the £250 million, 2 houses, and as one of them is affordable, will that be a success for you?
Well, we'd keep the £250 million because it's revolving. We've not lost the money, so we've still got the £250 million. We've already got 330 genuinely affordable homes, 100% in Waltham Forest. We know it works. We know councils like it. We know house associations like it. They give the money back and some. We made a profit on Waltham Forest. So if we keep the money we have and make some profit and build genuinely affordable homes, that's a success.
Mr Mayor, after 16 months into your mayoralty and 236 pages of some fine words in the housing strategy, you still failed to set any housing targets for new homes in London. Would you have thought Londoners would expect that when they selected you to be their mayor?
Well, you will know, I'd hope, that the place for targets to be set is the draft London plan. You'll be where, I hope, that we're currently working on a draft London plan, and you'll be where, I hope, that's normally the place where mayors set out their targets.
But Mr Mayor, we know this, but the draft London plan won't be delivered till 2019. I think there's a housing crisis now, isn't there?
Well, the draft London plan will be published this autumn. You'll be aware of the deal.
It won't come into action until
You'll be aware of the supplementary planning guidance, which has led to an increase of a situation where, in the year before I was mayor, only 13% of the homes given permission by the previous mayor were affordable, using the dodgy definition. In the first year, according to assessment by London First and Grant Thornton, 38% of the homes I've given permission to are genuinely affordable, which shows the progress made, 300% progress in my first year. On top of that, you'll be aware, for example, of the new London Living Rent homes in Beckenham. You'll, of course, also be aware of the deals I've made with councils, housing associations, of the 50,000 genuinely affordable homes in my first tranche of the 90,000 starts. And you'll also, of course, be aware, for example, of the deal we made with Waltham Forest. So we're making huge progress, and later on, if I get a chance to do so, in answer to your question later on, I'll give you a list of all the things we've managed to do in the first 12 months, including helping tenants in London, from the tenancy deposit loans to improving the plight of tenants who have bad landlords. So I'm really looking forward to answering that question later on from you.
Do you care how many homes are built during your mayoral term?
Yeah.
I mean, you referred to your predecessor, and yes, there's debates about what affordability was, but your predecessor had a target, and in each of his political targets, he said there would be 50,000 affordable homes by his definition, and he worked very hard to achieve those targets, and in fact, he exceeded those targets in both of his terms. What number can we expect from yourself over your first term for Londoners to be able to assess whether or not you've been successful?
So I've got a target of 90,000 genuinely affordable homes by 2021.
That really isn't your target, Mr Mayor. It's the government's target that's imposed upon you.
No, it's not. It's a deal I've done with government, and I want to build 90,000 genuinely affordable homes by 2021. We've changed the definition. Rather than an affordable home being one that is £500,000, a starter home, or ones that are 8% of market value, as a consequence of my policies and my deal, they will now be genuinely affordable, which means either homes where you pay a London living rent, 1/3 of average earnings, or homes which are shared ownership, part buy, part rent, or homes which are social rent. So that's a big change from the previously discredited definition of affordable home, and actually not correct to say the previous mayor met his targets either for homes built or affordable homes. And I can write you on that as well and give you the figures, how woefully short he was of those targets. The important point is this: not only do we need to build more homes in London, We've got to make sure they're accessible to Londoners, and so we're dealing with the issue of sales overseas. We've got to make sure they're affordable to Londoners, and we've got to make sure that they're in the right parts of London, but also making sure they're the right sorts of homes. We need more family homes rather than studio flats that may be affordable to people who can afford £500,000, but aren't really relevant to families who need to live in London.
These are wonderful words, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And there's no numbers attached to them.
Well, you will know, if you claim to be a housing expert, the numbers are in the draft London plan, and the draft London plan is published in autumn, and that will set out the targets.
It's your target I'm looking for. It's you, what you think will be the number that you will develop over your period of office.
Okay.
And you are singularly unable to come forward with a target that isn't somebody else's. Because whatever you say, the target you quoted was the government's. It was as a result of a deal of them giving you £3.1 billion. Very generous from a Conservative government to do that, as you've admitted.
The best deal ever negotiated by a mayor. But you will know the draft London plan is written by us. It's my draft London plan. So the targets in there are my targets. So I'm slightly confused by your criticism about me doing proper work consulting and getting a draft London plan done, which sets out what our expectations are and what my targets are. Now, I understand your embarrassment at the 8 wasted years when Boris Johnson was mayor. I understand your embarrassment as somebody who was part of Boris's team as a member of the Assembly and a member of the Tory group. But look, we're trying to fix this housing crisis. It will take some time. It's frustrating for me because we've inherited a legacy that is awful, but I'm determined to fix housing crisis, and I'm afraid it won't happen just in one term. It will take some time to turn around the mess I inherited.
I'm impressed by your lack of knowledge as to how the Assembly works. No member of we were not members of Boris's team. We
Didn't you?
held him to account.
So you didn't campaign for him in 2008, and you didn't campaign for him in 2012.
Unless we're talking about the paid staff you've got here, I mean, they aren't part of your team either. We all hold you to account, Mr. Mayor.
There you have it, Deputy Chair. A Tory member of the Assembly not campaigning for Boris Johnson in 2008, not campaigning for him in 2012, and now embarrassed to be associated with him. It says it all.
Not embarrassed at all. Mr. Mayor, Boris delivered what he said he was going to deliver. You won't tell us what you want. You won't tell us what you want to deliver.
Well, Deputy Chair, that's a question for me.
That's fine.
I've got figures here of the targets Boris Johnson had and where he fell short. And when I write to Assembly Member, I'll set out these things, and when he sees them, hopefully he'll be embarrassed by them.
We wait with bated breath
Thank
for
you
that.
very much, Mr.
I wonder if we can move on now.
Yeah.
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Just following on from Assembly Member Devenish's question in relation to night tube, Mr. Mayor. As you know, you did publicly agree to meet with Assembly members and residents in relation to night tube. I have had an email from your office saying that due to time pressure, you would rather that I, and I assume other Assembly members, met with your deputy. But on the day, I did say that, you know, a lot of time for the Deputy Mayor, indeed, but it was you that the residents want to meet with. So would you reaffirm, Mr. Mayor, that you will personally meet? I'm
very happy to, Deputy Chairman. It's just worth saying, obviously, the reason why the offer for the Deputy Mayor was made was that meeting was taking place sooner rather than later. And the Assembly Member can't have it both ways. Either it's an urgency, in which case you'd have thought he'd bite the hand off to see the Deputy Mayor, or it's not. If it's not an urgency, very happy to see him myself, but it may take a bit longer, that's all.
Well, I think the people who are suffering from the noise from the tube do think it's a matter of urgency, Mr. Mayor. But of course it's for you to place your own priorities on what you do. But you know, I appreciate again your offer to meet personally with them.
Sure. I mean, you can either play to the gallery or try and fix a problem. And the way to fix the problem sooner is meet the Deputy Mayor. But if you want to meet me, I'll have to meet you. But it might take a bit longer.
Thank you.
Right, now we go on, please. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to follow up to Assembly Member Boff's questions on the housing strategy. In terms of the land, about the £250 million to buy land, Mr. Mayor, I assume that once the land is when the land is released, it will be released with a development agreement, so that you'll know how many homes are going to be built on the land once it is released.
Yeah, of course. That's the big issue with this piece of money we've got. So previously, what happened is when there was the previous mayor, often if there was land, sell it to a developer who would do whatever he wanted to do with the land. We're going to make sure with this money, we do a deal with the developer and we have genuine affordable homes on that land. The Webb's former industrial site, for example, in Waltham Forest, 100% of homes affordable, genuinely affordable, 330. We'll make sure at least half of the homes on lands from the revolving fund are genuinely affordable.
And as well as developers, will this land be available to sell to councils as well who wish to deliver council housing development?
Absolutely right. And so councils are really excited by this announcement from us because it means that they can use this bid for this money, use it to assemble land. Often they have land, but the land next door they've not got. This money can be used for that. And they're very excited by this. And you'll have seen the comments from the leader of Waltham Forest. Although we did the deal in the end with the Housing Association, she was very excited by the deal we've done because it's her residents that benefit from this. But councils, housing associations and developers, by the way, also community trust, community land builders as well, will benefit from this if they want to do so.
Well, that's very encouraging. And if I could put in a plug for the St Anne's Community Land Trust, if any money is available to support the work that they're doing. Can I move on to the issue of affordability, which Assemblymember Boff also touched on? You envisage an affordable housing split of 30% London affordable rent as opposed to the Boris definition.
Yeah.
30% London living rent and 40% to be decided by boroughs. What progress have you made encouraging boroughs to use the London living rent as their intermediate rent level?
Oh, lots of good progress. I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised by the attitude of councils to this. And what it means for them is when it comes to them negotiating with a private developer, they can point to what we've been saying in City Hall and the SBG as well. You'll be aware, of course, that the smaller sites don't come to me. They've got to be above 150 units or above a certain height or size. But the councils, when it comes to smaller sites, can use the SBG, the direction of travel I've said, to try and get a good deal. And you'll see now, and we can give you examples of councils using what we've said in City Hall to get genuinely affordable homes rather than the con from the previous mayor.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Assemblymember Copley. Now we go on to the schedule of questions. And the first question is from Assemblymember Russell and relates to Fish Island, Hackney Wick.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. Half of Victoria Wharf was purchased by the London Development Agency in 2009 to enable a new pedestrian and cycle crossing to be built across the Lee Navigation Canal. Ownership then passed to LLDC in 2012. I am aware that LLDC's plans have attracted some concern, particularly around the planned ending of a temporary use warehouse by a small number of creative and business users who had been given short use leases by the corporation. Those tenants were aware when they signed their leases that this was not a permanent arrangement. The LLDC's plans to install 2 new bridges are not a standalone development, but are in fact part of a wider strategy for Hackney Wick and Fish Island in the local plan that includes up to 4,500 new homes, new employment space, including the protection and reprovision of 8,400 square metres of low-cost workspace and artist studios, and a major refurbishment of Hackney Wick Station. The bridges will connect communities to each other, including future neighbourhoods to be built, to wider forms of public transport, open space, new schools, healthcare facilities, universities and cultural facilities, and the economic opportunities that surround them, including high-quality jobs. The bridge plans have been reviewed and tested several times, most recently prior to the detailed plan application being submitted in early 2017. There was also extensive public consultation on the proposed designs for the bridges during the summer and autumn of 2018.
Mr Mayor, my question was actually, what is your view of the extent of the opposition to these plans? Let me just sort of make it a bit clear. You know, Assembly members Boff, Gavron, Shah and I have recently sent a letter to Peter Hendy calling for an immediate halt to the proposals until the LLDC had carried out a proper review and looked at alternative options. Assembly member Pidgeon has opposed the proposals. Assembly member Shah, as chair of the Assembly's Regeneration Committee, published a report, Creative Tensions, which recommended exploring the alternative. So that's the cross-party sort of consensus on this issue, which I hoped you were aware of. But there's also cross-party political opposition on the ground. The Labour ward councillor, Rachel Blake, the Labour mayor of Tower Hamlets, John Biggs, who's very clear on this, and the local Labour MP, Rashnara Ali, are they all wrong?
Well, I'm surprised you're not aware of the way the process works on planning matters. I'm surprised you're not aware of the consultation that took place, and I'm surprised you're not aware of the decisions of the committee, which represent a number of councils in that part of London. I'm surprised you're not aware that H16 Stour Road was passed through by the committee by 7 votes to 2, and I'm surprised you're not aware that the H14 was passed 8-1 by the planning committee. And these are decisions taken after due process and due consultation involving councillors from the relevant boroughs, and you're seeking my intervention against local democracy, which surprises me.
I'm asking you if you are aware of the extent of the local opposition and the cross-party opposition to these plans. That was my question to you. Let's pick up on this bridge. There's a pedestrian bridge at the moment at Monia Road, and the LLDC want to turn it into a link road from the Olympic Park to the A12, cutting through Fish Island. That's a rat run. So my question is, how is punching a rat run through the middle of Fish Island, which is a low-traffic residential area, supporting your healthy streets and traffic reduction policies?
Well, I think what Deputy Chair, this member is trying to do is overturn the planning decision's conclusions. And they've considered this properly. I do know that my Deputy Mayor, Jules Pipe, also met with local objectors to discuss their concerns and was reassured that the planning committee and those involved with decision-making had taken aboard my policies and made the decision looking at all the evidence. I can't overturn the planning decision's findings unless I've got a very, very good reason. The threshold is very, very high, and the evidence I've seen...
Yes, Mr Mayor, you're saying there is a threshold. You're saying there's a high threshold. You're saying it's very high. But that means there is a threshold. You can decide to ditch these plans. There's a compelling case to reopen the decision. Other development plans for the Olympic Park have been changed. These could be changed too. There are people from every party and campaigners over in the chamber here today. You're looking at a whole chamber of people who are really keen that you change your mind. Will you change your mind?
Well, I've looked at the process it's gone through, which I'd invite you to do as well. I've looked at the decisions of the planning committee. I've spoken to my deputy mayor, who's met with the objectors, and I've also asked TfL to work with the LLDC to review the traffic modelling and options for operating the bridge in light of my new draft transport strategy.
Mr Mayor, the LLDC work for you, so let's hope that you can get them to stick to your policies. Thank you.
The next question is from Assembly Member Twycross. It is about Brexit.
Thank you for your question. In my response to the government's Brexit white paper back in March, I highlighted the risk of the Prime Minister's extreme hard Brexit approach, stressed the importance of transitional arrangements and continued my fight for the rights of EU nationals in the UK to be guaranteed. I know the comments of the Deputy Chair at the start of the meeting. I think we're now winning the debate on these issues, but the government's progress, especially in agreeing the rights of EU nationals, over 1 million of whom are Londoners, is frustratingly slow. I thank the London Assembly's Brexit Working Group for their recent letter on this issue. I couldn't agree more that EU citizens deserve certainty and a simple process for establishing their status. I've called on the government to recognise the rights to permanent residence of all EU nationals in the UK. The recently leaked document on future immigration options for EU nationals is also concerning. By suggesting tough restrictions on businesses and on individuals, the government risks undermining the negotiations and risking their ambition of privileged access to the single market. Alongside meetings with senior members of the Cabinet, I meet regularly with David Davis, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, to press the needs of London's key sectors within the negotiations. I believe he understands our concerns and the concerns of business, but it's time that government started to reflect these in their negotiating stance. It's vitally important that the final deal between the UK and EU protects London's strengths, with no new tariff or regulatory barriers being placed in the way of our ability to trade across Europe. I've been clear that I believe continued membership of the single market is our best chance to achieve this and ensure the continued success of London's world-leading finance, professional services, tech, creative, life sciences and higher education sectors. Businesses need certainty to plan and invest, so it's also vital that the government gets on with defining what type of transitional arrangements it's seeking. Businesses around the world are taking investment decisions now, and unless the government can start offering some clarity about the future, London and the rest of the UK will start losing out.
Thank you. We're already hearing examples of discrimination against EU nationals as a result of concerns about what might happen in the transition arrangements. In light of the government's leaked memo, how can you continue to reassure Londoners, and particularly EU nationals, that they're welcome in London?
Well, it's really important that we understand that we have neighbours, friends and members of our family who are Londoners, but who are EU citizens who are feeling vulnerable, scared and uncertain about their future. I've been quite clear. As far as I'm concerned, they're welcome here, they make a massive contribution, and that's not going to change. I've received reassurances from members of the government I've met, I've got to be careful what I say, that the document that was leaked a couple of weeks ago in the press isn't the government's stated position, which reassures me. We've got to carry on lobbying the government to make sure when it comes to the negotiating with the EU that they reflect what we want, which is a deal that does right by EU citizens. And that, in my opinion, means they have a cast iron guarantee that they'll be welcome to stay here.
Considering the potential impact on people's future, not just EU nationals, but Londoners as a whole, do you feel the government's providing the public with enough clear information about what post-Brexit UK will look like?
No, and I think the evidence we have is I'm not sure they know what post-UK Brexit looks like, and that's a source of concern for the reasons I've said. Businesses around the world are making decisions now about future plans, but also families want to make plans about the future as well. The government needs to get to a position, a good position, and make that clear. It's also difficult for the EU to know where we stand. I've met 2 European ministers in the last week. They're none the wiser what the UK's position is.
Okay, thank you. I think we can all agree that it would be helpful for the government to clarify the position as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Dismore.
Some of the immediate risks that are appearing, Mr Mayor, would you agree that part of the problem that's emerged from that leaked government document is that EU nationals are here already are starting to leave, and that those who might have thought about coming to work in our public services such as the NHS are not coming, creating a real vacancy problem, particularly in the NHS, for example? And would you also agree that one of the immediate risks is that Brexit negotiations so far have been so shambolic on the part of the government that they're clearly not listening to the messages coming back from the other 27 member states, putting their own party political management ahead of the country's interests. And there's a growing risk now that insufficient progress will have been made from the EU's perspective. By next month it has to be done, that we won't even be able to start trade negotiations at the EU summit at the end of next month.
Well, I'm extremely concerned whether the October deadline is going to be met now in relation to lack of progress made in negotiations. I've been speaking to employers, and anecdotally, they've been they told me that some of the experiences they have is Londoners whose countries of origin is in the EU, some are returning home, and the explanation they give me is they think, well, if they've got no future here, they'll be able to get back first to start building a future in their country of origin before others go back to a country of origin. But it's a huge source of concern for us as Londoners. We need these Londoners from the EU in construction, in social care, in hospitality, in the financial sector, in the tech sector, and in the cultural sector, in the higher education sector. And the idea that even if we accelerate the job we have to skill up our youngsters to do these jobs as soon as possible, they will still be able to fill the vacancies is nonsense. And I've seen no evidence that we'll be able to fill the vacancies left by, the gaps left by EU citizens by homegrown talent.
So what can we do as Londoners to kick the government's backside to make sure that they actually get on with some very clear messaging?
Well, I think you were being very diplomatic when you said this has been done for internal party management. Actually, that's you being kind. I think there are real sources of concern that many of us have that the policy of the Prime Minister and the government are in the interest of the Conservative Party and keeping them together rather than in the interest of London and our country. And I'm hoping that sensible people in the Conservative Party will pressure on their leadership to recognise that actually there needs to be a big change, there needs to be some serious heavy lifting by our negotiating team, by our I mean the UK negotiating team, to make sure we get a good deal with the EU.
Next question is from Assembly Member Curtin and relates to the TfL Ombudsman.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. TfL is directly accountable to me and the TfL board, and I'm directly accountable to Londoners. The London Assembly also plays an important role holding TfL to account. Since I arrived in office, I've ensured that new controls have been put in place at TfL. This includes strengthening the TfL board, which I chair, and the appointment of a new Chief Procurement Officer. The current board is the most skilled and diverse ever and offers effective support and challenge. The TfL board is subject to an external review of its effectiveness every 3 years and internal reviews led by its Deputy Chair, the Deputy Mayor for Transport in the intervening years. The review for 2017 is underway and is focused on the new decision-making structure introduced in 2016. In addition to the annual reviews of the effectiveness of the board, TfL's Audit and Assurance Committee approves a governance improvement plan each year and reviews the actions taken in response to the plan from the previous year. TfL is already subject to the jurisdiction of the local government ombudsman and considerable public scrutiny, including by the London Assembly and London Travel Watch. I'm not sure if other members of the Assembly would agree to being replaced by new ombudsmen who would scrutinise TfL instead of them. I should also add that TfL applies the GLA Group Framework Agreement and must apply the highest standards of integrity and conduct to all of its activities. TfL also has a transparency strategy and will shortly be publishing a further consultation on how it can further extend the information that it makes publicly available.
Great, thank you for your answer, Mr Mayor, and it's a very full answer, and you've given lots of different bodies that scrutinise TfL, but you did mention the TfL board, which is part of TfL, so I'm not sure how much of an independent role they can have if someone has an issue. One of the issues that comes up from constituents and people who write me letters all the time are from black cab drivers, and you have a taxi engagement policy which was updated in April 2017. Since the update of that engagement policy, a lot of the taxi or representative organisations feel that there has been a lessening of communication and that they can't seem to get the answers, and communication with TfL has degenerated since that time. Which public body should taxi representatives go to if they feel they can't get an answer from TfL about the the challenges facing the taxi trade?
Well, the TfL board are independent of TfL. They don't work for TfL. And we've made sure it's more representative. So, for example, on the TfL board are a number of trade union experts. One of them, for example, a member of Unite, has some black cab drivers. Separately, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, and I can write you about this, has probably met black cab drivers and their representatives more than the previous Mayor or Deputy Mayor put together during their tenure. I've met with those who represent black cab drivers. We have a taxi and private hire action plan, and some of the stuff we've done for the black taxis over the last 16 months, no mayor has done before, from increased use of bus lanes, quadrupling the number of compliance officers to take action against those who use private hire vehicles wrongly, increasing the number of taxi cab ranks, really important, helping black taxis move away from diesel by a scrappage scheme, giving them a grant towards new electric black taxis, helping them use contactless and credit cards. You tell me any previous mayor that's done more, I'm happy to take lessons from them. Of course, we've got to engage with black taxi drivers. They do an incredibly important job. They're an important part of the public transport family in London. And we're going to carry on engaging with black cab taxi drivers.
Yeah, and I do appreciate some of the things that you said that you've done in London. But one of the big issues facing the taxi and private hire trade at the moment is, of course, the Uber situation. And coming up at the end of the month, you have to make the decision whether to relicense Uber or not. Now, before you were elected mayor, you said you can't take shortcuts with Londoners' safety. I'm putting private hire companies like Uber on notice. If I'm elected as mayor, it will be one strike and you're out. Even if one of your drivers has not gone through the right checks or not to hold legitimate documentation, then your licence to operate in the capital will be suspended instantly. Now, recently, one of your own policemen wrote a very strong letter about Uber and the situation where they've been found or alleged to be found not to be reporting serious sexual offences to the police, but just to TfL. Do you think that that has put Londoners' safety at risk?
Well, the government lays down the regulations by which those who grant licences to operators need to operate. And there is a process in place by which those who grant licences have to follow a procedure before deciding whether to grant or reject a licence. You'll be aware that previously a 5-year licence was given to Uber, as often happens to those who apply for operating licences. That was up for renewal. A temporary 4-month licence was given by TfL while they consider the application from Uber. You would appreciate, I'm sure, how inappropriate it would be, bearing in mind this is a quasi-judicial role that is played, for me as the Mayor of London and Chair of TfL to give a running commentary on an application made by somebody, if for no other reason, because they would then challenge that in the courts and say that the outcome of the application has been prejudged. And I'm sure you'd reflect upon your question when it comes to the role I've got to play as the Chair of the TfL Board.
I don't think you've answered my question directly, but let me ask you just one more finally. In the plenary session in July, the Assembly unanimously passed a motion asking you not to renew Uber's licence unless they had been deemed to have significantly improved their working practices. Do you think Uber has significantly improved its working practices over the last 4 months?
So there are officials in TfL whose job it is to decide whether an operator gets a licence or not. And what normally happens is they look at all the evidence. And I'm sure, as in all cases, they'll be looking at all the evidence.
Okay, it seems that you've not directly answered the question again, but my time is up now. Thank you, Mr.
Assembly Member Devenish.
I think we've agreed in this room before, Mr Mayor, that failures of customer service is a problem for TfL, and you've made responses in the past about how you're going to improve TfL's customer services. Can you update us at all on that, or would you prefer to write to us on that?
Customer services. TfL's made huge progress in relation to improving the quality of experience of public transport users, from the Tube, London Overground, buses, black taxis as well. They've got a team of people who respond to concerns raised by members of the public. Some of the changes that have been commented about over the last few days around King's Cross Station has been as a result of the platforms, a result of TfL responding to some of the issues raised. Look, TfL's not perfect, but I think, bearing in mind the numbers of people who use public transport, more than 5 million use the Tube on an average basis every day. Record numbers use buses. They provide a good job making sure they provide the best service possible to public transport users. And I compare and contrast the service we give to our customers to the suburban lines. Some of the suburban train operator companies, because they've got a monopoly, think they can do anything and the customer will have to use their service. That attitude does not apply in TfL. We make sure that even though sometimes a commuter will have no alternative, we're going to provide a good quality service.
Would you agree, though, there's more needs to be done? Because, you know, comparing yourself to one of those train services or perhaps BT isn't exactly, you know, a high bar, really.
There's always more that can be done, but I think you're criticising us for being better than the others and asking us to compare ourselves to, you know, a comparator who's perfect. I mean, I'm happy if you want to suggest a comparator for us to compare us to, and I'll happily do so. But one of the things the TfL board provides is that sort of analysis of not just numbers, very important for fare revenues, but also quality of experience they have. One of the reasons, for example, we've improved accessibility in stations. I've invested taxpayers' money, £200 million, to make more stations accessible, is the experience of commuters who are disabled. And that's an example of us addressing customer service.
Well, thank you for the challenge. I will come back to you on the organisations that you should be benchmarking yourself against. Sure. And I'd be interested also if you could come back to me in writing of organisations that the TfL board are already benchmarking themselves with, please.
Thank you.
The next question is from Assembly Member Pidgeon and relates to transparency and policing in London.
I would like to make clear that my first priority for local policing is protecting neighbourhood police officers. That's why I'm doubling the number of dedicated ward officers in every ward across London. So every single ward will have 2 dedicated police officers and 1 dedicated police community support officer. We also want to keep policing accessible, with 1 police station open to the public in each borough 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As I've said before, I'd rather we weren't having to close front counters and changing access to policing in the capital. However, this is an unfortunate direct consequence of the cuts imposed on us by the government. The last Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government started us down this road of massive cuts of policing in London by cutting £600 million from Met Police since 2010. The Met now has to make a further £400 million of savings from its budget on top of this by 2021. London's police service relies on a vast majority of its funding from central government, and this leaves very little fat in the Met's budget to trim, which is forcing us to make extremely difficult decisions. The proposals that MOPAC are consulting on jointly with the Met will see around half of police station counters close, releasing around £170 million in capital receipts to reinvest in policing and saving £10 million a year, equivalent to over 170 officers. It follows that if these savings aren't made from front counters, which are generally little visited, then the number of officers policing that capital will need to be reduced further. As far as the consultation is concerned, this is a genuine process of discussion with Londoners to engage with local communities about the changes and is running until the 6th of October. My Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, has been meeting with stakeholders to discuss the proposals and is continuing to do so, as well as attending public meetings. People can also contribute their views in writing to MOPAC and by email, or through a bespoke questionnaire, and many people have already done so. As I said, this is a genuine process, which was clear from the way we listened to some suggestions that you had about the way some of the questions in the consultation were worded, and these have now been amended. In addition, there are public consultation meetings being held in boroughs to discuss the proposed changes with the public. So far, 10 have taken place, and they've been well attended. There are many more planned. These are locally led and have been advertised in the boroughs. More information can also be found on the MOPAC website.
Why has it taken you 2 months to publish consultation meetings in each borough about your closure programme?
Those are published locally, and so it's a local Met decision. You'll be aware that the month before September is August, when many people go on holiday. And so I think the plan taken by local leaders was to have the meetings in September when people return from holidays rather than August.
But you would normally expect when you publish a plan to have the set of dates. You know, the first meeting at Kensington and Chelsea took place on the 6th of September with only 24 hours notice. Planned borough meetings on the 7th and 8th of September were changed with 2 days notice. Are you happy with this seemingly shambolic nature of your consultation?
Well, these are meetings organised locally. They're locally organised, and so if you're criticising, for example, the council, Kensington and Chelsea, I note that and I'll pass that on to them. If you're criticising other councils and other borough commanders, I'll pass on your criticisms. But you'll appreciate the good reasons why they probably didn't want to consult in August.
But your office has said the consultation meetings are led by the Met, and so they've not created any meaningful publicity. But it's your responsibility to oversee the consultation on your plan. And for all the disagreements I had with the previous Deputy Mayor for Police, he personally attended consultations in every single borough over a 2-month period in 2013, when, and as I understand it, the current Deputy Mayor is planning to attend only a few. How does this complete lack of public engagement fit with your claims, Mr Mayor, to be the most transparent mayor in London's history?
Look, I mean, that's a speech, not a question, and it's inaccurate. The Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime has attended many public meetings. There'll be at least 32 meetings in every borough across London. A number of the members of the public have been responding via the website, via the questionnaire. Numbers have responded by coming to those public meetings. It simply is inaccurate to suggest that the previous Deputy Mayor attended more meetings than the current Deputy Mayor. And I understand the reasons why you're embarrassed because of your responsibility starting these cuts in 2010, and so you're using process to mask the substantive position. The substantive point is this: we are having to make these cuts because of decisions made by the previous government and the current government. We're trying to involve as many members of the public as we can, and we're carrying doing so. The consultation ends on October the 6th. There is still time for people to get involved, and energy should be spent getting Londoners involved in those consultations. The Safer Neighbourhood boards are doing a good job advertising the meetings. Ward panels are doing a good job. They're using local newspapers and posters, and we should use all the means we can to get Londoners involved in the consultation.
I understand the position you're in, Mr Mayor, but given the fact you publish your document, you would normally publish your full suite of consultation meetings at that time, even if they were in September, to give people notice. You can't expect people to turn up with a couple of days' notice. Some of the meetings were then cancelled. They were changing every day on the MOPAC website. You own the police estate. It is your responsibility. And given in my view, the failings of your office in dealing with this consultation. Will you extend the length of the consultation to really make sure people in Croydon, for example, have got to get their response in the day after their public meeting? Give people a bit more time, have more time with these meetings and truly engage with Londoners.
I understand this smokescreen. It's been used by politicians of all parties before. The point is, if I'd have organised centrally, can you imagine the criticism if Weedon City Hall imposed meetings in London, imposed a date, imposed a venue a month ago? The Assembly member would be the first to criticise us for not allowing local police, local politicians to be involved in the meetings. Because we've asked safer neighbourhood boards, we've asked ward panels, we've asked local leaders to organise the consultation, we're being criticised for not being control freaks. The substantive point is this: we're having to make big changes across policing in London, including having to close front counters, including having to reduce police staff and make big changes as a consequence of decisions made in 2010 and decisions made in 2015. And we'll make sure between now and October the 6th we try and involve as many Londoners as we can, because these decisions affect all Londoners.
It's disappointing. I don't think you have a grip of what's going on here, Mr Mayor.
Time is up for Assembly Member Pidgeon. Assembly Member O'Connell.
Thank you very much. On the same theme, Mr Mayor, I fully support Assembly Member Pidgeon's comments around this. The facts of the matter is, in Westminster they had 4 working days' notice, in Havering 8 days' notice, in Sutton Mopac put the wrong date on for Sutton, as I say. This to me represents a rather underhand way to approach engagement. Londoners would be quite happy for you to impose a date if there was plenty of notice. Assembly Member Prince and I joined the previous Deputy Mayor across London, met some wonderful people across a whole range of London, and they were very well supported, Mr Mayor. So the point really is you seem to be deflecting the responsibility. It is your responsibility around making decisions around front counters, but you're blaming the local engagement on local officers and local policemen. Would you not agree, Mr Mayor, that this is no way to engage with Londoners? And would you, again, supporting Assembly Member Pidgeon, agree to extend the consultation so you can hear properly from Londoners?
Can I just say, Deputy Chair, through you, with respect, why the Assembly Member's point is irrational? If I was being underhand, as has been alleged, about these changes, I wouldn't be talking about them all the time. I've been talking about the consequences of government policy and nothing else in relation to policing terms for months now. During the course of the election campaign, I was criticised by the leader of the, sorry, not by Senator Bacon, about my worry that if the Conservatives win the general election, we have to make big changes in relation to front counters and police stations across London. So it's not underhand if I'm talking about it all the time. Since the general election, I've been saying publicly that as a consequence of the cuts, we may need to close front counters and police stations. It's hardly underhand if I'm talking about it all the time and letting Londoners know what the consequences of the cuts are. And as far as the local meetings are concerned, look, I've been reassured by Mopac and the Met Police that as far as the meetings are concerned, they've been well advertised, organised locally, but also that's the only way people can respond to the consultation with the best in the world, the best attended public meetings, both previously and now. 200-300 may attend those public meetings. The online response to consultations is far greater. So we're encouraging Londoners to respond online, to respond to the Mopac question, and to respond via Assembly members, via councillors and via MPs, and they have done so at large numbers already, and they'll continue to do so, I'm sure, by October the 6th.
We will study those numbers after the event to see how they compare with previous engagements. I would just ask you, Mr Mayor, in line with the previous Deputy Mayor who attended every meeting across London with colleagues, can you please ask your Deputy Mayor to attend these remaining engagement meetings, to take some responsibility and to explain to Londoners your decision-making?
Well, she has to, Chair, been attending many meetings, and she'll be attending many more between now and October the 6th.
That's a no then. Okay.
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I think you said a few minutes ago that you worked, or Mopac worked with the local councils to organise these meetings. Is that what you said?
What I said was that the meetings were organised locally. They're locally organised by the MPS local leadership, advertised to partners, and by partners I include local councils and others. They're promoted locally through a variety of different ways in each borough, that includes councils, including online, social media, through safer neighbourhood boards and ward panels, through local newspapers and posters, and some of these local authorities advertise too.
So there was no consultation with the local authority in organising the dates of these meetings, Mr. Mayor. That's a fact, which obviously you're inferring because you said there was no consultation. Do you think it's acceptable, Mr. Mayor, to hold a public meeting on the same date as the day of a full council meeting?
Well, look, I can't in City Hall determine the dates of these meetings across London. You'll appreciate that MOPEC want to involve as many local residents as they can. The information is on the MOPEC website. Another way that there can be a response to the consultation. MOPEC understand the concerns raised by some members. I'm sure they're making sure that there are new ways of residents to get involved in the consultation. And they want to get as many Londoners involved in the response to the plans, I'm afraid, to close front counters and police stations.
So why would you then organise a meeting on the same day as a full council meeting in that borough? And why would you say to the leader of the council there was no negotiation or potential to change the date? MOPEC arranged the venue themselves without discussion with the council. The public consultation is in the MOPEC's draft public access strategy. So even the tone coming from MOPEC is not acceptable, is it?
Well, Deputy Chair, I'm not sure what the question is, but what I can tell you is that, as I've answered before, these are locally organised meetings. I'm aware that some daytime meetings were changed to the evenings to make it more people for people to attend the meetings. But these are locally organised with partnership with local stakeholders, and I'm sure the comments made by the Assembly will be taken on board by local organisers between now and October the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find it quite appalling, really, that no notice was given to Assembly members, or no reasonable notice given to Assembly members, or that to local council leaders, and I find that acceptable.
We've got to be very careful that some members aren't being inaccurate and misleading the public. So the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime made an invitation to council leaders and to MPs when the consultation was launched, and many good council leaders have taken up the offer. And if it's the case that some council leaders can't be bothered to take up the offer, and some members are embarrassed by their council leaders, I don't apologise for that. But the offer was there. She's met many council leaders. She'll carry on meeting them between now and October the 6th, and thereafter, as she does regularly on a regular basis.
Assembly Member Devenish.
Have you prejudged every single station closure, Mr. Mayor?
No.
Well, you may have read yourself the Even Standards interview with the Deputy Commissioner, where he was ridiculed in terms of particularly going out to see residents and English language speaking. But that wasn't the point that was missed by a lot of the media. At the bottom of that article, he prejudged the 5 stations in my constituency. Have you had legal advice that you are open to being judicially reviewed on that basis?
I've just said I've not prejudged the outcome. I'm just sorry if people write their second question before I've answered the first question. It's not my fault. But I've not prejudged the outcome of the consultation. So one of the reasons I've not prejudged is because I want a meaningful consultation. But secondly, as in answer to the TfL question around Uber, it's not unreasonable for somebody to challenge that because the outcome's been prejudged.
Have you had legal advice subsequent to that interview by the Deputy Commissioner that he is in danger of being JR'd by my very, very bright residents?
I've not sought legal advice, Deputy Chair. I'm not sure about any legal advice sought by anybody else.
Thank you.
Okay. The next question is from Assembly Member Duval and relates to London security after Brexit.
Can I thank you?
Sorry, we thought Mr. Syed indicated, Chair. He was going to come in on this. This question was relating to mergers and property. We want to raise a question on mergers.
I do beg your pardon. Assembly Member, which of you is going to ask a question?
Well, there is a question on mergers, Chair, but if I can come in now, because it's part of the same debate. Mr. Mayor, at this moment in time, we in the Labour Group remain sceptical about the way plans for borough mergers are progressing. Evidence from the pilots, certainly the one in Havering, Barking, and Dagenham and Redbridge, suggests that things are not well. I know that the leader has been, Barking Dagenham has been in correspondence with you. Target response times have only been met 52% of the time in Barking Dagenham. Clearly this is not acceptable. I think you acknowledge that. You've said in the past, and I quote, "We will not proceed with borough basic command units if problems identified have not been addressed." Is this still the case? And are mergers off the agenda for the time being?
So you're right to articulate some of the concerns raised by the first two pathfinders, particularly in the east. Yeah. I'm told that there's been improvement recently, but we're not going to proceed with this. The Commissioner is quite clear, as is the Deputy Mayor, unless we're satisfied that the concerns in relation to the two pathfinders have been addressed. You'll have been aware of some of the resources being diverted to improve the response time, but you're right to express the concerns of your constituents and yourself and others about the pathfinders, and the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor are keen to resolve those.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. I've raised with you before the local concerns over the mergers in Camden and Islington, including poor community engagement, poor response to one-on-one calls, and most importantly, the worsened response times to emergency I and urgent S calls for help. You rightly said in response to a written question that the rollout across the capital won't happen until the merger problems are sorted out. Can you say when the evaluation is going to take place and confirm it will be carried out on published and objective criteria?
My understanding is that the evaluation of the pathfinders we're going to do towards the end of this year would have been done earlier, but for the problems that have been articulated by Member Desai. You'll be aware of the additional increase in resources to resolve the issues. By the way, it would be unfair to say it's been a blanket failure, because there have been improvements around dealing with vulnerable people, around some of the other services that were identified by the HMIC report. So the pathfinders has led to some improvement of services in some area, but clearly, as was referred to by Senator Desai, response times is a big source of concern for everyone, and so we need to address those. The idea is that towards the end of this year, we, with the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor, evaluate the pathfinders before deciding on how to proceed.
But will that be on objective and published criteria?
Can I write you about that? I'm not sure what the criteria is, but it should always be criteria that reassures the public rather than one that's a source of not reassuring the public. So I'll write you to let you know exactly what the criteria is and when we expect to evaluate that by.
Okay. Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just on that final point, Mr Mayor, could you write to all Assembly members on that criteria, because that is something that is worrying everybody, and it would be very useful to have it. Thank you.
And also hopefully be able to give an idea of when it will happen by, because I'm not quite sure, but I'm meeting the Commissioner later on today, and we discuss this, as you'd appreciate, when we do meet. I should hopefully by the time I write you also give you an idea of when we think the evaluation will take place as well.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Assembly Member Duval on London security after Brexit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. It's important that the Brexit deal for the UK is the right one for London. I have and will continue to work to protect London's interests, and I'm working to strengthen London's ties further with cities in Europe. In March 2017, following the atrocious terrorist attacks, I visited Brussels and Paris. As part of these visits, we also discussed security cooperation post-Brexit. It continues to be important that we learn from each other and show solidarity in the face of an assault on our shared values of life. My most important message throughout this has been that we approach Brexit in the right spirit, confidently and with the goal of ensuring continued security for London. Counter-terrorism, of course, is a particular area where future security cooperation is important, but we must remember that the use of tools such as the European Arrest Warrant, Europol, European Criminal Records Information System, passenger name records, and the Schengen Information System have a significant role to play in the fight against crime in general. Terrorism is not the only crime that crosses borders, and for many years police have been deployed overseas to assist in the collective effort against all crime. On the whole, there is consensus that it's in the interest of both the UK and EU that cooperation on security continues. It's essential that the government prioritises security and moves quickly to settle future security cooperation. The tools I've mentioned have all been identified by senior colleagues in the Met Police as significant and are in need of being maintained or replaced. And as part of the negotiation, the voices of experienced officers and security experts must be taken into account. Finally, nationally, the Met National Police Chiefs Council and the National Crime Agency are undertaking work to ascertain the operational requirements post-Brexit, and MOPAC is involved in these discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Can I just say, look, I agree with you, and I'm not making party political issues. I think it's very complex what the government are trying to do, whatever their outcome. I think it is about whether we disagree with them or not. But this is one issue where there should not be allowed any drift or uncertainty, and we should be further ahead of the game than where it was. The House of Lords EU Committee has done a very useful piece of work highlighting some of the difficulties around this, and particularly about data sharing and Europol. We now need to step up, and I know that you do regularly meet with the Home Secretary, but I think we need some action. And I wouldn't normally sort of put you on the spot now, but I think the sort of action that we might need is, can you seek an urgent meeting with the Home Secretary to actually gauge some progress on this matter? We know there are some important issues around jurisdictions and legal jurisdictions, but we must have a sense of movement that doesn't just rely on goodwill. We all know it's in our interest to do this, but we actually need to do it. Confusion, uncertainty means the people that operate the service will start to take decisions and it will become slower. And the slower those decisions are taken, there will be a tragedy. There will be many tragedies on the back of this if we don't get this right. And so what I'm asking you to do is urgent meetings with the Home Secretaries. Will you also link up with your police and crime commissioners across the country? I think London Metropolitan Police Service is not just dealing with London. We have a sense of leadership for the rest of policing in London. And would you make them to have common cause with government as a sense of urgency to get on with this matter and to be clear about the direction that we're travelling? Will you also contact your counterparts in other devolved assemblies and parliaments? So Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, a bit difficult at the moment, I granted, but there are interested political parties there that I'm sure would share a common cause of moving this issue on further. We cannot risk drift. And at the moment, too much concentration, and rightly so, they need to be able to twin track, but this is so important in terms of security for London, this nation, and for Europe. It is in our interest, but we can't rely on that. It doesn't work that way. We need to move forward.
Can I say, Deputy Chairman, in response to that question, powerful question, that as a consequence of the House of Lords EU Committee report and the representations made by Senator Duval, I'll give some thought about how we can accelerate the reassurance that we need, working with the police and crime commissioners and the devolved administrations to get this reassurance. But just to say this by way of reassurance to Londoners, in the meantime, of course, all these things are still in play. The concern that Senator Duval is alluding to is what happens if, for example, there is no transitional deal in March 2019. Question, do we fall off the cliff edge when it comes to security matters as well? I've been quite clear that security must not be used as a bargaining chip, and there was some confusion in the media about what members of the government were saying in relation to this. The evidence given by our police officers to that committee should worry us if there is no deal done in relation to security, and some of the questions in relation to Europol, passenger name records, access to criminal records, are the sorts of gaps that could lead to safety of Londoners being jeopardised. So let me work on how I can accelerate the reassurance that I think we all need to make sure that the cross-borders work that takes place, which has led to people being brought back to London to face justice, for example, terrorists, which has led to dangerous people not being allowed to come here, which has led to good working together to investigate crime, carries on after we leave the EU. So I'll do that. And I'll then write back to Senator Duval to let him know what action I've taken, because he can then pass on the action we've taken as a consequence.
Thank you.
The next table question relates to Brexit and London's higher education sector, and it is from Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you for that question. The UK has a strong reputation as a place for global talent, and we must ensure that we continue to be a beacon for talent from across the world. International students should never have been included in the net migration target. This is a great export opportunity for London and the UK. What other service export will be politicised in this way? As the recent ONS data published in August this year shows, there is, and I quote, no evidence of a major issue of non-EU students overstaying their entitlement to stay, end quote. Some will of course stay on for further study and research or move into skilled work opportunities here. This is something that we should welcome. We should also be extremely proud that London's higher education sector is world class. We have 4 universities in the world's top 40. We have world-leading institutions, specialist institutions, including the Royal Colleges, London Business School and national research centres, such as the Francis Crick Institute. London continues to be the most populous city in the world for international higher education students. It is the higher education capital of the world. However, this success cannot be taken for granted, and our universities need policies that support them, not work against them. In my recent meeting with the Secretary of State for exiting the EU, David Davis, I was joined by Professor Alice Gast, President of the Imperial College London, who made this point persuasively. My priority is for the government to introduce a clear post-study work opportunity for international students, one that universities can include during recruitment periods. I'm pleased the Home Secretary has commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee to assess the impact of international students, and I'll be responding and making the case for clear policies that support our universities.
Thank you, and you're quite right, London is a world leader in our higher education sector, and the benefits of that ripple out into the wider economy. Did you get a sense from your meeting with government that they understand the benefits of the higher education sector and they are going to work with you to ensure that that sector is not damaged? I know you say about the Home Secretary's immigration work, but I understand that's not going to report till next year at the earliest.
Yeah, so I'm always the optimist, and there's some pieces of good news. David Davis gave the impression that he understands the importance of higher education to not just London's economy, but the UK's economy, the synergy between R&D, employers loving London because of our universities, and just bear in mind the proximity also of Oxford and Cambridge to London as well. I'm also optimistic because of the announcement from Joe Johnson, who recently reiterated the government's commitment to underwrite the funding for all successful bids made by the UK participants for Horizon 2020 that are submitted before we leave the EU. The problem, though, is that if you're a potential student, if you're a postgrad, if you're a research student, if you're an academic, you're nervous about what will happen when we leave the European Union. And that's why reassurance is required at all stages. We're going to be submitting evidence to the MAC. You're right that it'll report for a while. And that's why it's important, the Prime Minister who's making a speech shortly in relation to the European Union needs to give the reassurance that should come from the Prime Minister about the role of higher education going forward.
Thank you. I think what the latest ONS figures show is the importance of basing policy and asks on evidence. And what assurance can you give that your own work on Brexit and the impact it has on the London economy is actually based in evidence?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't subscribe to the school of thought that people in this country have had enough of experts, as was indeed the view of Michael Gove. I'm of the view that actually the evidence is unarguable when it comes to higher education in relation to the contribution to London, but also the contribution to the country. Put aside for a moment the economic benefits. Think of the influence we have when you have world leaders educated in our country. Think of the influence we have across the world when we have some of our alumni who are chief executives, teachers, and elsewhere around the world. And the idea that we would somehow diminish inadvertently the role we have around the world by a bad negotiation with the European Union or by an immigration policy that disadvantages students who want to come here and study and then work here doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question comes from Assemblymember Prince, and it relates to your transport strategy.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. My draft transport strategy sets out how I will deliver my manifesto pledges and my longer-term ambitions for London. I have already delivered a number of my manifesto promises, including my commitment to freeze TfL fares and have introduced the Hopper fare that has been used over 100 million times already. I've overseen the successful launch of London's night tube after it stalled under the previous mayor, approved 4 river crossings in East London, and committed a record amount of funding, around £770 million, to improving cycling across the city. These are just some of the many transport improvements achieved over the first 16 months of my time in office. The current TfL business plan is designed to deliver my priorities. It includes £2.5 billion of funding that will help get Londoners walking, cycling and using public transport more. Progress is already being made on removing traffic from Oxford Street through close collaboration with Westminster City Council, and I recently launched the Livable Neighbourhoods programme, which will lead to local improvements across London. I'm committed to delivering a London-wide cycle network, and later this year I'll be providing further details on my Vision Zero approach to reduce road danger on London streets. In my manifesto, I committed to delivering a zero-carbon city by 2050, and my draft transport strategy sets out how this can be achieved, complemented by my recently published London Environment Strategy. I'm introducing the T-Charge in October, as well as fulfilling my manifesto pledge to consult Londoners on an early introduction of the ultra-low emission zone. As I set out in my manifesto, I'm committed to improve public transport accessibility. TfL's business plan includes a record £200 million for accessibility improvements on the Underground. I'm continuing to upgrade the bus and tube networks and have committed to delivering the Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf crossing, an extension to the Bakerloo line and Crossrail 2. Significant progress has been made on all these fronts. And finally, Deputy Chair, a key part of my manifesto is to deliver more affordable housing, and my draft transport strategy outlines how this will be delivered in a sustainable way. TfL is delivering 50% affordable homes across their surplus sites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's very kind. In your manifesto, not the earlier work of fiction that you published during your election, you said that I will ensure that the markets for licensed taxi drivers and for private hire vehicles are fair, with special privileges built in, as they always have been, for those who become a licensed London taxi driver. Could you tell me what extra special privileges you've provided or what's in your...
Sure. So a special privilege we've added is more taxi cab ranks. Another special privilege is more of our bus lanes being used by black taxis. Another privilege is speaking to councils to get more of their bus lanes used by taxis and working with them for more taxi cab ranks. Another privilege is us using revenues to quadruple the number of compliance officers to take action against the PHVs, which are causing huge problems. Some would say it's a privilege, us giving them a diesel scrappage scheme to help them move from diesel black cabs. Others would argue it's a privilege us helping them move to contactless and credit cards. Some would also argue it's a privilege giving them a grant towards buying greener taxis. I think it's really important to recognise black taxis have played a huge role as part of the public transport family. I want them to carry on doing so.
They're not really all that special, are they, Mr. Mayor? You must practice that laugh a bit better.
Tell me any other previous mayors done more.
They're not really all that special, are they, Mr. Mayor?
Tell me any other previous mayors done more.
They don't really do very much more than already has been committed. But do you think it is really a special privilege to force, as from January the 1st, black cab drivers to have to pay over £60,000 for a new cab? Do you think it's really a privilege that the enforcement team are no longer run by the TPH, and that to marshal events they now have to get written permission from another body? And is it really a privilege that there is only one roadside charging point at this moment in time in London, when it's been accepted by you, Mr. Mayor, and promised by you, Mr. Mayor, there will be 75 by Christmas? Do you really think there will be 75 charging points by Christmas, Mr. Mayor?
Well, let me address that, Helen. I know, Deputy Chair, that the Senate member couldn't answer which previous mayor has done more for black taxis than I have. But as far as black taxis are concerned, he'll be aware, because he reads the same newspaper as I do, I'm sure, of the criticism I receive from private hire vehicle operators about the special privileges I'm giving to black taxis. They're always complaining about how it's an unlevel playing field because of all the help I give black taxi drivers. I meet, as does my Deputy Mayor, regularly with those that represent black taxi drivers, and we take on board some of the challenges they face. They are facing huge challenges. The amount of time it takes to do the knowledge, the cost of a black taxi, and we're trying to help them as much as we possibly can. And we'll carry on engaging with them. But I think it's unfair to assume that because we're trying to fix the air in London, it's unfair to criticise us for trying to improve the toxic air coming from vehicles,
Mr. Mayor,
blaming black taxis for
Mayor,
that. We're not doing that.
What about these 75 charging points you promised by Christmas? When are they going to be delivered? Are they going to be delivered by Christmas, Mr. Mayor? Because as from the 1st of January, you're not allowed to buy or register a diesel taxi So someone who actually wants to use their brand new £60,000 plus electric taxi won't have anywhere to charge the thing.
Well, I think the Assembly member is in danger of being unfair, which is unlike him. He'll have seen the draft environment strategy I published. I will have seen the draft transport strategy I published. I also have seen the work we've done with councils to have more charging points, not simply on the estate we own, but working with councils to have charging points elsewhere as well. And we're working with the black taxi trade to make sure we can have more charging points as well. But some of this is
they're not convinced that you're going to be delivering the 75 that you promised. Are you? A simple question, Mr. Mayor, and if you can't answer, if it's too difficult, I understand. Are you going to have 75 roadside charging points in place by Christmas, as you promised the taxi trade? Yes or no?
We will have all the charging points that I promised the taxi trade on the timelines I promised the taxi trade.
So we can expect 75 roadside charging points that you promised by Christmas this year.
There's a difference, you see, between Assembly members trying to deftly put words in my mouth that I didn't say and me keeping the promise that I did make, and I will keep the promise.
Well, there's definitely a lot of difference between the promises you make and the promises you keep. I'll give you that, Mr. Mayor. If I can,
the rehearsed ones are the best ones.
I made that one up actually. You just gave me it on the plate and I took it. Mr. Mayor, if we move on, actually, you have received a cross-party letter from MPs. And I would also add my pressure on that to press you, Mr. Mayor. I know I understand that you can't give a commitment today, but can I press you, Mr. Mayor, and will you accept the letter from the cross-party MPs in London that we will not be renewing Uber's licence? Will you take that on board, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Deputy, I'm not sure how many times I can say this without getting bored, which is unlike me to be boring. But I will not give a running commentary on an application made to TfL in relation to a licence, and you'll appreciate it will be improper for me to do so.
So, moving on to Uber, Mr. Mayor, do you think that it's reasonable that the chair of the Nighttime Commission is at this moment in time, or certainly will be very shortly, representing Uber drivers in a London court, when indeed he's the Nighttime Commissioner and he should be representing all elements of the nighttime economy, which would include black cabs as well as Uber? Do you think that's reasonable, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think it's important to get the facts correct before making assertions. And the facts are that the chair of the Nighttime Commission, who works roughly speaking a week as chair of the Nighttime Commission, is also a full-time barrister and a QC, and one of the country's leading QCs around licensing. He, for example, acted for Fabric, which stayed open, as a consequence of a good deal done between the council, the police and Fabric. His expertise is in relation to live music venues and nightclubs. He plays no role at all in relation to the licence of Uber. But it's also worth reminding you, and I'm sure you probably know this, that taxis, and you'll love the pun here, operate on the cab rank principle, which is that they take the case that they're given and they're instructed on. And when he was first given this brief, he took advice from the Bar Council's relevant committee to ask if there were grounds for him not to accept this case, and they said there weren't. So I think what you're in danger of doing is making an unfair assertion which just isn't there.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm sure you would agree that black cabs are one of the many stakeholders in the nighttime economy. I'm sure you'd agree that, and it is the chair's role and responsibility, along with the night mayor, Zar. The chair will have a detailed understanding of policies, process and system underpinning the nighttime economy. They will also have a track record of working collaboratively and finding common ground between diverse stakeholders. If you're representing Uber against the black taxi trade, that you can't find any common ground, can you, in a court of law, while you're contesting against each other? So do you not think, because I think most people in London would think that there is a conflict of interest, Mr. Mayor?
Well, in those circumstances, what I'd expect the chair of the Nighttime Commission, who is also a barrister, to do is seek advice from the monitoring officer at the GLA and ask the monitoring officer, excuse me, Mr. Monitoring Officer, is there a conflict of interest me taking on this case? and I expect the monitoring officer to give a
Sorry,
response.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
And in this case,
the question
he did get advice. He did take advice. You've got to ask questions.
Mr. Mayor,
You're making serious assertions. He took advice, and the advice from City Hall was
Mr.
there's no
Mayor,
conflict.
there's no question about him. He seeks advice. I'm sure he's doing everything within the rules. The question is to you, Mr. Mayor, do you not think that is a conflict of interest? Do you not think that you would not be surprised that the leaders of the taxi firm have lost all confidence in your nighttime commission chairman because of this conflict of interest? You're the man who makes the decision on who the nighttime chairman is, and it's a question for you whether you believe there's a conflict of interest there.
So, I agree with the views of the monitoring officer at City Hall, which is there was no conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right. And the next question comes from Assemblymember Copley and relates to rough sleeping.
Thank you. The latest statistics show that during my first year, the rise in rough sleeping has effectively halted for the first time since 2009. It rose every year from 2009 to 2016, with 8,108 people seen in the streets last year, virtually unchanged from the year before. This contrasts with a rise of 7% the year before and a doubling since 2010, when the reported figure was 3,975. Since I became mayor, a sharper focus on rough sleeping is showing early signs of progress, but these figures highlight just how much work needs to be done. Clearly, one person living rough in the streets of our great city is one too many. The fact remains that over 8,000 people sleeping rough in a global city like London is simply unacceptable. I'm determined to do something about it, and so I've established my No Night Sleeping Rough task force to bring together key partners to identify what interventions are needed to help rough sleepers off the streets. Last year, the task force helped secure an additional £4.2 million towards new targeted services for rough sleepers. I've also recently announced a number of smaller projects funded by £1 million Rough Sleeping Innovation Fund, including a new web-based tool to cross-check key details from the missing people database with those on my chain database of rough sleepers in London, 2 projects helping female rough sleepers, and a project based on the Housing First principles to help those with multiple and complex needs. All these services look to help rough sleepers by recognising the complex, varied reasons why people end up on the streets. The task force includes representatives from the key councils and organisations who are helping rough sleepers and are well placed to make sure our services are comprehensive and effective. What's more, the investment I'm making in new and improved services, such as my new night transport team to help the number of rough sleepers who use night tubes and buses, may mean the number of people seen sleeping rough rises in the short term. I'm working closely with the government's new Rough Sleeping and Homelessness Task Force and Advisory Panel, not only to make the case for extra resources, but also for the government to address the longer-term underlying causes of rough sleeping.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I particularly welcome the action you've announced recently on the people who are sleeping on public transport, and we've been looking at hidden homelessness on the Housing Committee recently, and it's a big problem. Can I ask, first of all, because there's been some concern, there was some concern about the data sharing between Chain and the Home Office, and that was happening under a memorandum of understanding established under your predecessor. Can I ask what progress you've made establishing a new memorandum of understanding with the Home Office, and what measures to define data sharing and analysis will this contain, and will it be published by the GLA?
Thank you for your question. So it's just worth reminding ourselves that EU citizens don't have access or recourse to public funds or some of the other facilities that UK citizens have access to. Often they're vulnerable and they're in crisis, and so they need support. So I want to make sure that the government's policy is implemented in a way that ensures that EU nationals sleeping rough get the advice and information they need to live safely in London, and to make sure those who are vulnerable are given the support they need if they choose to return home, accessing those services they need. We're currently working on the MOU. Deputy Mayor James Murray's working on that. I've got no problems at all sharing that with you in your role once that's been finalised. As you'll appreciate, there's a consultation, there's negotiation taking place with the Home Office. The key issue you're alluding to is the sharing of data that's taking place routinely, and my understanding is it's aggregated data shared routinely, and the concern you will have, I suspect, is individual level data and I'll make sure that James Murray shares that with you.
Thank you, and I welcome that being published. There was a rather damning National Audit Office report this week into the DCLG's handling of the doubling of rough sleeping and the impact of homelessness on public spending. What actions would you like to see from the government to support efforts to reduce homelessness and eliminate rough sleeping in London?
I think the NA report is extremely useful because there's now a direct link that the NAA show between some of the welfare benefit changes from the government and street homelessness, rough sleeping.
So directly contributing to the rise in homelessness.
Cause and effect. Cause, you can't use this. The NAA say it's unarguable. And so the obvious thing the government could do is change their welfare benefits policies, which are accelerating people leaving home and living rough on the sleeps. Some of the problems we've got to recognise are complex. Mental health issues, could be family breakdown, some of the issues around young people not having work and welfare benefits, alcohol dependencies. And that's often the reasons why we work with charities who are experts in this field. The government needs to do much more. I welcome the involvement of Sajid Javed in chairing the task force. James Murray will be attending there. We're working closely with the government, not simply resources to deal with the issues, but stopping people being made homeless, rough sleepers in the first place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And the next question is from Assembly Member Bailey on the Metropolitan Line extension.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. When the Mayor of London was a Conservative, the government agreed that TfL would assume responsibility for the Metropolitan Line extension in return for greater control over suburban rail routes. I'm sorry, as indeed are commuters, that the government's unfortunately U-turned on this. The potential benefits of devolution couldn't be clearer from the success of London Overground and TfL Rail. Better services, improved reliability and more satisfied customers. This has been seen on old lines that are now part of the TfL network, such as Euston to Orford Junction, Gospel Oak to Barking and Liverpool Street to Chingford. The gains brought about by previous devolution applies much to the eight London Overground and TfL rail stations that sit outside the GLA boundary, as they do to the 114 that are in London. The current one-size-fits-all approach to rail franchising means rail services across London often fail to live up to their potential. So I've suggested to the Secretary of State that the DfT and TfL look at the barriers to wider devolution in London and in particular assess the further recommendations in the Gibb report that a decision is taken by 2019 on whether to devolve Southern's metro services to TfL in 2021. I've recently had a positive meeting with the Secretary of State for Transport and we agreed a joint statement of the importance of progressing Crossrail 2. I'll continue to engage with him and the Department of Transport to consider how to best take forward the recommendations in the Gibb report.
Thank you, Mr.
On the
Mayor.
Metropolitan Line extension,
pressed for times, Mayor, and I'd just like to pose you a few direct questions.
Sure.
I'm pressed for times. Thank you for that, and you can send that to me, and I'll read your notes for you.
Sure.
What, in your opinion, needs to happen to make sure the Metropolitan Line extension is delivered?
I'm optimistic. I'm meeting with the MPs in that area shortly. We're working with the Council to bid for government's infrastructure fund. There's a shortfall of £50 million. If we can tap into that, also get local funders involved, we can get going on the extension.
Do you think not delivering the Metropolitan Line will weaken our case for rail devolution? Around this room, we all support you in that. It's cross-party. But it looks to me that if we can't deliver this, why would the government then trust you to deliver better rail devolution?
It's just worth getting the sequencing right. The government did a U-turn before the Metropolitan Line extension announcement in relation to the shortfall of funding. So you can't do a cause and effect in relation to the shortfall of Metropolitan Line and the government's U-turn. But I think...
But hold on there, because the Metropolitan Line doesn't even warrant a mention in your transport strategy. And if you look at the Bakerloo line, it's in there 9 times. Are Londoners to believe that you are no longer interested in doing this?
No, so the Metropolitan Line extension benefits people outside of London, but we're still committed...
Some rail devolution, that's
but we're still
reason
benefits Londoners a lot as well. We're still committed to £50 million for the Metropolitan Line extension. That's still there. So the money promised is still there. I'm not resigning on that promise. What's happened, though, is the cost of it is £50 million more. And so my point is, we'll pay the £50 million we promised, but someone needs to pay the other £50 million.
Just make us time's pressing. But if you didn't sit in your hands so long, that £50 million will probably not be as large. It is growing because you need to act. Can you commit, direct question, can you commit to delivering the Metropolitan Line?
But it's a direct question based on a misleading stat. It is not the case that the cost of the Metropolitan Line extension has gone up because, quote unquote, so I've been sitting on my hands.
TfL wrote to my colleague Gareth Bacon and said it's been increased.
No, the cost has increased because there was no cost estimate done by TfL before. So what happened was,
Well, how can
previously...
it increase if it had done no costing before? I don't understand that.
So let me explain to you in plain English.
No, would you explain to him at a later date, perhaps in writing, in plain English, please, because time has run out.
Thank you, Mayor.
Right. The next question is from Assemblymember Duval on a post-garden bridge.
Sorry.
It was originally scheduled to be from Assemblymember Copley.
So you confused me there, Deputy Chair. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay, the bridge.
Along with me.
Yeah. My draft transport strategy sets out the ambitious goal of achieving an 80% mode share for sustainable travel modes by 2041. This means more people walking, cycling and using public transport, making London a better place in which to live and work. I'm determined to deliver the necessary infrastructure improvements to support more sustainable travel across the city. The Livable Neighbourhoods programme was launched early in the summer, which will provide funding to boroughs to deliver improvements for walking, cycling and public transport. This will be complemented by plans to deliver a London-wide cycling network. Transforming Oxford Street by removing traffic was a key manifesto pledge, and we're working closely with Westminster Council to deliver this. Improving the tube, bus and rail networks is also essential to support more sustainable transports, and I'm committed to continue the upgrade of the tube and bus networks and made wider improvements. I want to see Crossrail 2 delivered, which will lead to 200,000 new jobs and 200,000 new homes and provide a massive boost to the UK economy. And I'm keen that an extension to the Bakerloo line is delivered to Lewisham, opening up opportunities for new jobs and homes in South East London and improving travel options. I also support a government-led extension to the Elizabeth line eastwards from Abbey Wood to support regeneration in the Thames Gateway corridor, and my draft transport strategy seeks to provide alternative, genuinely sustainable river crossings. I'm working to deliver a new walking and cycling crossing between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf, and also the feasibility for a new DLR crossing further east between Galleons Reach and Thamesmead. I'm clear, in conclusion, that these new infrastructure projects will not only enable London to become one of the most sustainable cities in the world, but will improve transport provisions in London for all of us.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just also raise to you, I mean, in terms of the road infrastructure crossings and some of the messages from TfL, one of the big causes of air pollution is static traffic and keeping it moving. It doesn't necessarily have to move at speed, because that's one of the issues, and I know that there is some thinking in your team of moving on to the next stage of how we can reduce more. But, you know, when TfL approached with issues and suggestions to reduce air quality issues like Silvertown Link, they're not quite really on board. There's some interesting work being done by the Highways Agency around that. Do you believe that there are sustainable road crossing solutions? You've got it in your transport plan for Galleons and I call it the Bexley crossing. I know it's not called that, but for want of that, do you know, but it's not quite in terms of the issues that it's there really. I mean, we welcome, I think, for those part of north of the River Thames, south of the River Thames, there on the public transport issues, and we've got a good history of public transport crossings. But there is an issue about traffic moving on both sides of the river, and interconnection. So, what's your thinking about that?
So, I mean, I think your question has illustrated why status quo on roads is not an option. There were representations made to me when I became mayor to cancel the Silvertown Tunnel because the tunnel contained roads. And the evidence I saw was actually the current situation is intolerable in relation to air quality, but also the congestion which causes problems for businesses. And so the Silvertown Tunnel is designed in a way that we can maximise also buses, the guaranteed bus lane, but also we can make sure those who are walking and cycling can use the facilities of a bus to get from this side to the other side, which will free up the congestion caused by Blackwall and other issues around that part of London. Now, the old maxim is you build a road, people will use it. And I have some sympathy with that, so we don't want to create generation for roads. But what you're alluding to is the fact that there is congestion there, and we need to find ways to alleviate it, but also the potential in east of London for development on the brownfield site. And that's one of the reasons why I approved the London Overground Barkham Riverside crossing. We've not ruled out, it's really important to just say that we've not ruled out further crossings. In fact, my transport strategy gives details of some of the other crossings in the east of London. In fact, there's 4 in total. I met last week with Lord Andrew Adonis, who's the chair of the National Infrastructure Commission. He's quite keen for us to look at river crossings in the east, and so we'll be working with him in relation to modelling, but also how we can do it in a way that doesn't risk air quality. But you're right, we can't just let it be, because it's not working for our city, but also those in the east of outside our city as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assembly Member Twycross and is on holiday hunger.
I'm afraid that the data required to accurately report how many children that went hungry during the recent school holidays in London doesn't exist. However, we do know that there are around 700,000 children living in poverty in London and are therefore at risk of going hungry during the school holidays. Any hunger among children in a city as prosperous as London is simply not acceptable. I'm pleased the government's now dropped plans to end universal free school meals for 4 to 7-year-olds, but free school meals are not always taken up by children who really need them and are obviously not available in school holidays. I therefore give my full support to the Kitchen Social Programme run by the Mayor's Fund for London. This summer, the programme delivered holiday food provision across 16 boroughs and served approximately 10,000 free school meals to 1,600 children. This October half-term, Kitchen Social will be supporting an additional 30 Kitchen Social clubs, but this support is only the tip of the iceberg. To make the programme more sustainable, the Mayor's Fund is raising the profile of holiday hunger through campaigning and evidencing the negative impact it has on young Londoners. As you know, Rosie Boycott, chair of the London Food Board, is passionate about the issue of holiday hunger, and my new London food strategy, to be published early in 2018, will include a focus on food poverty and hunger to help all Londoners secure access to healthy, affordable food. I also support the work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Hunger and Food Poverty and its chair, Sir Frank Field, who is raising a bill to ensure that there is a statutory responsibility for this UK-wide. However, food poverty and hunger do not exist in isolation, and that's why I'm working to make London more affordable so parents can feed their children in the holidays. That means making public transport more affordable, making sure homes are generally affordable, and also making sure Londoners get a decent wage for doing a decent day's work.
Thank you. You've anticipated most of my supplementary questions, but I really welcome the work of the Mayor's Fund for London on this area. I saw some of the work they did in the pilots last summer, and the difference they can make, albeit with a relatively small number of children, is quite remarkable. What more would you like the project to achieve going forward? I mean, you've mentioned the work in the half term, but have you got particular ambitions and goals for the project going forward?
I mean, one of the key benefits of the work in relation to the Kitchen Social Project is around social integration. And so Matthew Rudd, my Deputy Mayor in that area, is working with Rosie to see how we can target those parts of London to try and get a better connectivity between children from different communities. The frank answer is we're limited by the resources we have and the resources we can raise. As you know, we've got no statutory responsibility in this area, but we think it's important. And so the success of this scheme is contingent upon how much money we can raise with the Mayor's Fund, the generosity of those who give to the Mayor's Fund, but also how much money we can leverage in from other areas as well. My frustration is the lack of resources, but clearly if Frank Field is successful in relation to moving the government nationally, in relation to recognising this big gap during the holidays, that will help us in relation to the work we're going to do in this area.
I'm sure you are aware that the right to food is a human right, and you highlight the scandal of child hunger in our city. Are you concerned that government policy, particularly around social security and welfare reform, is potentially increasing the levels of children who are going hungry in London?
Well, absolutely. There are 700,000 children living in poverty in London. 700,000 children in poverty. And that's why I referred to in my first answer the interconnection between the cost of living in London, wages, housing, transport. And we need to make sure we address those issues as well. And so they're all interconnected. And the report referred to by Tom Copley in relation to the NAO report talked about the connection between welfare benefit changes from this government and homelessness. And, you know, I know from my evidence as a Member of Parliament and also as the Mayor of London, there is also a connection between children going hungry and government policy in relation to all sorts of issues around housing, around transport, in relation to the remuneration people get. And so that's why all our policies are connected in that extent of trying to address the issue of young Londoners not being able to fulfil their potential. And so food poverty, food hunger during the holidays is just one of the things we've got to address.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Assemblymember Dismore and is on police funding.
Thank you for this question. It allows me once again to discuss one of the more pressing issues of my mayoralty. I've written recently to the Home Secretary Amber Rudd to raise the issue once again, as I've done repeatedly since I became the Mayor. I'll continue to engage with the Government in the run-up to the autumn budget. I want to thank the Assembly for its cross-party work on the most pressing matter that we face in relation to policing. And I'm sure any further representations you make ahead of the budget will be very helpful. You'll recall that the Met have already delivered significant savings of more than £600 million over recent years. Front counters have closed, buildings have been sold, and almost 3,000 PCSOs and police staff posts have had to be lost. A further £400 million of savings are required over the next 4 years because the flat cash budget settlement provided by the government fails to take into account the increase in demand or inflationary pressures on policing. Of the £400 million savings, the Met have identified roughly £200 million, which has already meant some hard choices and difficult decisions. As I have made clear previously, finding another £200 million will be very tough. Unfortunately, over the last few years, crime in our city has been increasing in volume and complexity. We desperately need the government to reverse the cuts and provide a real-term increase to Met Police budgets. We also need the government to announce that it's abandoning its funding formula review. We also need the government to provide the full funding of the National and International Cities Grant to reflect the true additional costs that come with police in the nation's capital. The government has been too slow and too quiet on the issue. The Met is running out of time. We have to make decisions on budgets and workforce now. If ministers do not act and the current funding arrangements remain, officer numbers may fall below 30,000 for the first time since 2003.
Well, thank you for your answer. That paints a pretty bleak picture unless we actually do get more from the government. I hope we can all welcome reports that the government is finally considering giving the police officers a much-deserved pay rise. Now, whether it's enough for our hard-working London Met officers, it's rather debatable to say the least. The $64,000 question, though, and I think it's rather more than that, is where the money's coming from to fund this pay rise. Has the government indicated they will meet the cost of the pay rise, or will it have to come from the existing overstretched Met budget? And if so, what will the impact be on the Met's finances?
Well, just on that point, firstly, can I thank you for making the point how hard our police work day in, day out. In fact, inflation is roughly speaking 3%. The announcement from the government of 2%, 2% this year, 1% from next year, doesn't appear to be funded. And we discovered this yesterday. My understanding is that the 2% increase will mean an additional cost of about £18 million per year. We've got to find that from a budget that's already got massive problems in it. And so there's no point the government announcing a pay increase if they're not going to fund it in the context where we already have big problems with our budget in London.
What would you say to those Conservative London MPs, like the two we have in Barnet, and especially the MP for Chipping Barnet, who says she doesn't recognise the £400 million shortfall in government funding, who consistently voted for the central government budgets that have led to this underfunding crisis in the Met, and who now questions the need to close the police station in Chipping Barnet?
Well, what always astonishes me is the collective amnesia from Liberal Democrat politicians and Conservative politicians who are responsible for the cuts we've seen over the last 7 years. And they laugh. Conservative Assembly members and Lib Dem Assembly members laugh when I have to remind them we faced, since 2010, £600 million worth of cuts. They voted MPs every budget, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Since 2015, we've got to find another £400 million. £1 billion cut from a Met Police budget, voted through by the MPs you refer to. At the same time, they say how wonderful, and they are, by the way, our police officers are. At the same time, they vote through a 1% increase only in relation to pay in previous years. We know inflation's 3%. And so nobody should be surprised that police officers look aghast at the MPs who are now celebrating a cap being lifted and an increase in their pay of 2% in the context of there being fewer police officers, fewer police staff, front counters are closing down, police officers being stretched, and the prospect of police numbers in London, police numbers going to levels we've not seen since 2003.
Last point, you mentioned the National Police Funding Allocation Formula, which could be introduced from 2018-19. And the estimates were that the Met stood to lose somewhere between 184 million and 700 million from its yearly budget under the previous version. Have there been any indications from the government that they will drop this scheme, and if not, what would the outcome of that be?
Well, I think one of the consequences of the government calling a general election in June is not simply the cost. £140 million spent on this general election wasn't needed. Think about the police officers that could have paid for. But also, I think they've missed the boat for the police funding formula to take place next year, which is good news for us, because we get another year's worth of grace which is one way of looking at it. But they've not ruled out the police funding formula being changed in subsequent years. My call to the government is to reverse the cuts, give us the funding that we need, give us the funding that experts say that we need, including the government experts, but also say once and for all they won't be changing the police funding formula, which would punish London.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Gavron and relates to the Planning Committee report into off-site manufacturing and your housing strategy.
Can I, Deputy Chair, through you, congratulate the Planning Committee for producing such a timely and important report. I agree that we need to support greater housing delivery in London through additional housing construction activity that takes place in factories, which is what we mean by off-site or precision manufactured housing. We cannot deliver the number of new homes we need using traditional methods of construction alone. That's why, alongside our work to boost construction skills in London and to secure access to the single market after Brexit, we need to support a greater role for precision manufacturing in home building. This has the benefit of boosting overall capacity in the construction sector and offers the potential of greater consistency and quality control, alongside additional benefits in terms of speed, delivery and cost efficiencies. In my new draft London housing strategy, I set out how I will support precision manufactured homes. I will do this by providing direct funding for these homes through my affordable housing programme, particularly through the Innovation Fund and my strategic partnership with housing associations. The first round of my Innovation Fund received a large number of bids, many of which were related to precision manufactured homes. I recently announced the first Innovation Fund contract with Pocket Living, securing a deal under which at least a third of the 1,000 homes will be precision manufactured. I hope to announce further deals on an ongoing basis. Alongside this, I'm negotiating with government to secure a London share of the National Accelerated Construction Fund in order to further support precision manufactured housing in the capital. My new London Development Panel, which I am currently procuring, will include experts on precision manufacturing to support the public sector and housing associations to bring forward housing development. My team is working also at how we can further support manufacturers and developers in working together to aggregate demand and build more homes through precision manufactured housing. Precision manufactured housing not only has the potential to have a positive impact on the pace, scale and quality of home building, but also to contribute positively to wider objectives. A more pleasant, safe and high-tech working environment has the potential to increase the attractiveness of the construction industry to a new pool of workers. It also provides an opportunity for London's growth to contribute even more to the prosperity of the whole of the country through the location of manufacturing facilities across the wider South East and beyond.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive response. Given that you are clearly seeing that off-site manufactured homes meet a whole range of objectives, of your objectives, and that you're consulting currently on your strategies, transport, environment, housing, economic development to come, and then, of course, the London Plan, will you consider including policies and mechanisms to galvanise the sector when you come out with your final strategies?
We have to. We've got to find ways to support the sector. It's a new sector. One of the things that really attracted me to when I was reading about the sector after reading your report was how we can use the sector to help other parts of the country, actually, because the precision manufacturing won't just help London, but will help the rest of the South East and the UK as well. So not only are we going to use the various strategies we have, we're going to use the bully pit of City Hall to persuade others to use this as well.
That's very exciting, because then you clearly see that London's demand could stimulate the factories outside London and actually help us progress this new industrial sector. So
Absolutely.
London could be leading that.
Absolutely. It's a good example of an interventionist industrial strategy, helping a sector. But, you know, I've not seen any downsides. Making the sector more attractive to a certain pool of workers, creating jobs, meeting the demand of more homes, helping employers outside of London, environmentally sustainable, value for money. The upsides are very persuasive.
Can I just raise one more thing, which is that I agree that the housing strategy is very strong in terms of how the off-site manufactured homes can actually address the skills challenge that the construction industry faces, and you've talked a lot about Brexit and that. But actually skills won't, without supply, skills won't really fly. And in order to get the supply, you need demand. Now, the industry has told us, that they're poised to deliver, but they need you to catalyse that change, and you've got the levers. And they're very interested in how you might help certainty of demand with your land. And you've been talking too about how you're going to land assembly. Could you just say a little bit how you can use your land assembly, strategic partnerships?
So one of the representations made to me is, and I'm paraphrasing, why would we invest in this sector when we're not sure of the demand going forward? And we need the certainty of demand to make sure we invest in this, skill up people. And so we want to provide that reassurance. And there's a number of ways we want to provide that reassurance. The Innovation Fund shows there's money there to help. The deal we've done with Pocket is an example of a supplier we know uses this fund. In relation to the assembly of land, sometimes that's used to help potential developers know that they've got the certainty of knowing they can use the land, but it's got to be commercially viable in relation to the revolving fund. The revolving fund works to make sure we can get the money back. But there's other pieces of land we have access to as well. So we're happy to talk to members in the sector, whether it's the constructor, whether those who are the manufacturers or other builders, how we can give them the reassurance they need. Bearing in mind, of course, we've got tier for land we're bringing forward. We're hoping to do a deal with the government around the London Estates Board on the NHS. And so I'm happy to talk with the sector through my deputy mayors, if not through me, to how we can give them the reassurance they need. We want this sector to thrive and flourish, and we want this to be a centre of excellence going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Berry and relates to protecting Londoners' human rights.
I'm very clear that protecting Londoners is my first responsibility. That includes protecting their lives, but also respecting and protecting their human rights as well. And despite the rise in crime over the last few years, we should not forget that London is an overwhelmingly safe city, and we need to ensure it remains so. The Met Police is a largely unarmed service, and even with the increase in officers equipped with firearms and tasers, they will certainly amount to a minority of police officers. My desire to maintain this and that of the Commissioner is clear, and we both recognise that this is an essential building block of the British policing model of policing by consent. Unfortunately, recent events such as the London Bridge and Westminster have highlighted that on occasion we rely on the police to take extreme actions to defend the lives of innocent people. Their courage and professionalism in responding to such threats should be acknowledged and praised. We should also remember that tasers do protect life too. For example, in the attack at Leytonstone Tube Station, potential victims were protected and the suspect was tasered and brought to justice, as happened in the case in Russell Square last year. Furthermore, the rise in the use of knives in London has to be addressed. An intelligence-led stop and search can make a real contribution to reduce the numbers of people, especially young people, being stabbed and killed. However, I should be clear that I believe that stop and search has to be intelligence-led and not carried out indiscriminately. The work of the investigative and inspection agencies such as IPCC and HMIC has my support. MOPAC has for a considerable period also ensured the use of firearms, tasers and intelligence-led stop and search data is open to the public through the use of dashboards. For me, the biggest game changer in ensuring the human rights of all people is protected is the successful rollout of body-worn videos across the Met, 20,000. Human rights are best protected by openness and transparency, effective oversight and a commitment to learn from the transformation in police and public accountability.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a very helpful answer. With my supplementaries, I don't have much time, and I wanted to focus a bit more on the tactics that might most likely impact Londoners' daily lives. You haven't mentioned them yet, so if I could take spit hoods first. When they were first announced in September last year, you were concerned, and you insisted on a pilot instead of an immediate rollout. However, in July this year, the police announced an extension to all the custody suites. I asked you for some evidence on the use of them so far, and there's limited numbers, but they so far suggest that black people, and black women in particular, are much more likely to be hooded. So I wanted to ask, what was your measurement of success when evaluating the pilot in relation to your initial concerns?
Well, I mean, I think we've got to be accurate. So at present, the number of times these hoods have been used is low. They've been used on 11 women. But what is clear is that the Met and NOPAC are working to oversee and gain a better understanding concerning the use of the tactic. At present, the low numbers make drawing any conclusions about disproportionality very unwise. The sample is simply too low. That's why the Met have chosen to expand the pilot. And as far as the evaluation of spit hoods is concerned, the data collected concerning the use of hoods will identify if mental health is a factor, for example, and so we're going to make sure we evaluate all these things before we can properly conclude, before anybody can properly draw the adverse conclusions you currently are.
Okay, the numbers so far, they are small, they are, however, worrying. So just to conclude, you'll be monitoring what is a continued pilot very closely for clearer evidence of discrimination.
Well, I mean, we'll be monitoring them anyway. The issue of discrimination is sort of a point further down the road, but we've got to monitor them to make sure they're safe, to see how they're being used, who they're being used against. So far, again, good news, I think, no complaints have been made about use, which is a good sign. And so the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner, the Deputy Mayor always want to make sure that all the tools used by the police are used properly, and spit hoods is one of those that are used by the police.
Okay. On tasers now, the data we have shows they are used more against BAME Londoners, and I've asked in written questions about a policy of no camera, no taser, but your answers haven't been absolutely clear. So just to ask, at the moment 2 changes are being made, the rollout of body-worn video to police and more tasers and changes in the rules so that some officers can use them when they're on their own. So what I want to make sure of is that officers who are not wearing a camera will not be able to carry a taser so that they're never used in an unwitnessed and unaccountable way. Can you reassure us that that won't happen?
Well, I will reassure you and Londoners about tasers. Actually, most times when an officer pulls out a taser, they don't use them. In 90% of the cases, they're not used. And it's really important to reassure Londoners of that. It's also really important to reassure Londoners that actually, in relative terms, few officers carry a taser. We've got a police service of 31,000-ish. Roughly speaking, 1,500 officers will have a
but
taser.
More now, and the change to single officer use is significant. And what we want to know is that, just simply yes or no, will they be able to use it on their own if they're not equipped with body-worn video?
So of the 43 police forces around the country, I think nearly all of them, save for the Mayor, have a single officer use of a taser. We're the only police service in the country that requires 2 police officers to be present. I've been reassured that these changes are sensible and proportionate. You'll be aware, we announced recently that body-worn videos will also be now being used by armed officers and tasered officers.
You're not answering my question. Will body-worn video be required for officers who are allowed to use taser on their own?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. I mean,
there should be a policy that just says yes or no on
No,
that.
can I just say how incredibly naive your question is? Let me tell you why. An officer often has to make a split-second decision whether to use a taser. I'll give you the Russell Square example. In the Russell Square example last summer...
But it's about how they leave the office. Are they equipped with taser and body-worn video? Can they take taser out if they haven't got body-worn video?
If I can answer your question, the Russell Square example last year, Police officers got to the scene in less than 6 minutes, faced with somebody with a knife who had actually killed somebody with a knife and was killing others. That officer's got to decide in a split second whether to use his taser. The officer decides to use his taser. Now, I'm not going to criticise an officer if he uses the taser in that split second and hasn't turned on his body-worn video. But you're right, in general terms, normally officers should be using their body-worn video.
Whether they're wearing it when they leave the office.
Well, of course officers should be wearing the body-worn videos on here. The question is whether they should use it.
Well,
Okay.
we're out of time.
Yes, you are out of time. Assembly Member Duval.
Mr Mayor, this is a very important question and thank the Greens doing it. Do you accept, Mr Mayor, that the human rights legislation works both ways and the employers, public sector employees, police, transport operators and all, should also not have to go about their duties without being spat at in some way? So the use of hoods, if it's monitored, if it's done correctly, is right. It was also about protection of those carrying out their duties on behalf of us.
I mean, can I just say, the reason why I'm frustrated is, thank you for that question, is because, look, I answer more than 100 questions at Mayor's Question Time. I'm happy to do so. But you can't ask flippant, short questions without allowing me a chance to answer the question. And you're right to remind us, we've got to look after our police officers. Just like we've got to look after our firefighters, making sure they've got the equipment and the tools to do their job. Of course, there's got to be checks and balances. And the police will be the first to say there's got to be checks and balances. They recognise they've got certain rights you and I don't have. But actually the reason why we paused before the spit hoods were used is because we wanted to make sure there was consultation. So nobody was taken by surprise. A custody officer or a police officer in a custody suite who decides to use a spit hood does it in exceptional circumstances. When you think of the number of people arrested, taken to a custody suite, who go through a custody suite, the actual numbers on whom a spit hood is used is very, very small. For somebody to, from that, extrapolate there's discrimination against black women, I think is unfair on our police. And, I'm determined to give our police the tools they need, but I will defend them if unfair allegations have been made against them. And I think that assertion from the Assembly member was unfair.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Sahota and relates to the increased demand on the MPS from problems relating to mental health.
Thank you for raising this important matter with me. It brings together two key areas: ensuring that we have an effective police service that keep Londoners safe, but also tackling health inequalities and improving mental health in London. Over the last year, the Met Police received an average of 5,932 calls per month, 1,835 per week, and an astonishing 262 per day. About 20% of these calls to police came from hospitals and mental health units. There is no simple answer to the question of what has caused the rise in demand. This is a very complex matter. We all know there are significant financial challenges right across the public sector, and a recent NHS survey suggested staff shortages and changes in mental health commissioning structures are having a detrimental impact on their ability to ensure sufficient mental health provision. This comes down to a systemic failure across the health and justice system caused by a lack of government funding and a refusal to adequately invest in areas that our communities need most, in this case, that the police and health service need. Time and again, we see a surge of pressure on other services, resulting in the police being pulled into areas where they are not best placed to respond. The police and health services are currently stretched to their limit, and this is why I repeat my call for greater devolution in London, including healthcare funding and a reversal of the cuts to police budgets. The fact remains, though, I say by way of conclusion, that continued budgetary pressures are a risk to the success we have already achieved. We cannot allow this to continue and for the police to fill the gaps that other agencies cannot.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive response, Mr. Mayor. You will, of course, know that Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary said that by the time the police become involved, many opportunities to intervene, prevent mental health deteriorating to a point to which people are in danger already have been missed. This is both ineffective and expensive. In a well-ordered and compassionate society, we should not rely upon law enforcement officers to support people who need medical care. The severe problems of mental health provision in this country are not only failing those who need treatment, but also create an unacceptable strain on the police force. The Inspector Michael Brown, the mental health coordinator of the College of Policing, said that most people in contact with police about mental health issues don't need the police, they need the mental health professionals. Would you agree that this is an underfunded police service having to pick up the pieces of an underfunded NHS?
Yes. And you know the thing what is always remarkable is how we expect the police to pick up the pieces. A lot of these problems should be dealt with by mental health professionals. There's all sorts of challenges in the NHS that you'll be well aware of from personal experience. But let me just give you a couple of numbers. Roughly speaking, in London, 2 million of us, more than 2 million of us, have mental health, have poor mental health. It's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 Londoners. And because of the gaps in provision, in social care, in healthcare, often people aren't helped, and often the police have to step in. One of the things we need to do is change the attitude around mental health. Thrive London, which I know you support and have played are an advocate for, will hopefully lead to a movement in London to try and, at an early stage, help people with mental health issues. But it's important to recognise that it's a huge, I don't want to use the phrase which others do, drain on resources. But when the police have found that resources and have got to prioritise, it doesn't make sense to me for them to spend 20% of their time responding to calls around issues that should be being dealt with elsewhere. But when you speak to those who are supposed to be elsewhere, they'll also complain about budgetary pressures, which means they can't respond and help people who need their help.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all the support you give to mental health services and to the police. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Assemblymember Desai.
I recognise that the job of the police is changing dramatically and that the Met must be supported and properly resourced to respond to both existing and new types of crime. You're right that online crime has created a new and large demand on policing in London and around the country. The internet has vastly increased the scale and speed of traditional offending. To start to address some of these challenges, in April, I launched the Online Hate Crime Hub, the first of its kind in the UK, to help tackle online hate crime and improve support for victims across the capital. The Met's taken an important step in tackling this growing threat by establishing a fraud and linked crime online, Falcon, command to provide a dedicated response. I've also recently appointed Theo Blackwell as the capital's first ever Chief Digital Officer. Theo will champion cybersecurity across London and develop a cybersecurity strategy to better protect London's digital infrastructure. The Met and National Crime Agency work to tackle online child sex abuse. The response is delivered at a local level as well as centrally for the most serious and complex investigations. For example, the Met runs a number of undercover operations online engaging with predatory paedophiles, resulting in arrest, prosecution and convictions. The government also needs to start thinking more about this area, how we tackle this type of crime, as do internet providers and social media companies who inadvertently facilitate some crime types.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I welcome all these various initiatives. My question to you is specifically about the work of the London Digital Security Centre, which was set up in 2015 and is funded by MOPAC with the purpose of helping small businesses to both manage and combat cybercrime. There are 1 million SMEs in London, and they're often overlooked in this debate. And that's the reason why I'm asking this question to you. People, I think the thinking out there is that the cybercrime basically affects the big bodies such as banks, and it's really the impact on SMEs that I'm concerned about. I know that amongst various initiatives, there's a conference in City Hall on the 12th of October with your Deputy Mayor Rajesh Agrawal attending, and which I hope to be at as well. What challenges do you think the centre has faced so far? How do you see its work progressing? And what do you see coming out from this conference?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for being an advocate and fighter for small and medium-sized businesses, Unmesh. So in addition to a new Chief Digital Officer who will do some work around cybersecurity strategy, which will help small and medium-sized businesses, I committed in my police and crime plan to continue to support Operation Falcon, as well as the London Digital Security Centre, which you referred to. And for those that don't know, I know you do, this is a private, academic and public sector partnership which does deliver important advice to small businesses on cyber-enabled crime. Often small businesses haven't got the resources to deal with this issue. The mission is to help businesses to innovate and grow operated in a secure digital environment. And so some of the conference will be taking experiences of small businesses, some of it will be providing practical advice to small businesses, but also my view is actually small businesses are most at risk because they have the least amount of resources to protect them from criminals, cyber criminals.
I'm conscious of the time that I've left, so Mr. Mayor, I'll just say that I met with John Unsworth of the Centre recently, and I hope to work with him in the 3 East London boroughs that I represent to trial their work with local councils, and depending on the outcomes, we hope to share the lessons learned across London.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Whittle and relates to Eon Pacific.
London is indeed the world's leading financial and professional services centre, with more foreign banks than any other city, an unparalleled and diverse pool of talent, and a complex business ecosystem that cannot be replicated anywhere else. These are some of the reasons why Eon Pacific have taken the very welcome decision to establish their new European headquarters here. I congratulate them and wish them the best of luck. I believe we should be proud to have the world's leading financial services industry, both in London and across the UK. Overall, this is an industry that employs 2.2 million people across the country, contributes over 10% to the economy and over £70 billion in tax revenues. The UK's financial and professional services sector is clearly thriving in the single market, and I hope that continues in the future too.
I'm very pleased, Mr. Mayor, you joining me in congratulating. Also, you might know that Deutsche Bank, which is also one of the banks that's apparently going to leave after we had the referendum, they've also just signed a lease on Moorfields for 25 years for a major European headquarters. These are all very, very good signs, Mr. Mayor, aren't they? And yet the whole sort of gist of the way that the economics is talked about, particularly in this chamber at question time, has taken on the air of a wake. We've just seen when I originally questioned you about this in June, about London's position. Are you pleased it's actually lengthened its position now over New York, Singapore and Hong Kong as the leading financial centre?
Look, can I say, Deputy Chairman, I'm the strongest advocate for London. I say we are the greatest city in the world. What I won't do is, though, put my head in the sand and pretend things are hunky-dory in relation to our future prospects. We have not left the EU yet. Notwithstanding that, some of these statements made publicly, so I'm not divulging conversations privately, don't bode well. I don't welcome the announcement from Goldman Sachs. I don't welcome the announcement from HSBC. I don't welcome the announcement from UBS. I don't welcome the announcement from JP Morgan. And so let's not pretend that there aren't some grey clouds over the horizon too.
I think that the pretence is all from your side, actually, Mr. Mayor. I mean, the fact is that these sort of institutions have to take a very long view. And the truth is that during the campaign with the referendum, you were, as chief promoter, you were one of the people who basically said that this was all simply going to fall apart. It's just not. In fact, the good news keeps coming, doesn't it? The good economic news keeps coming.
Can I just pop
kettle black? You may laugh. Okay, right. We've got like tourism up 7%. We've got retail sales up 2.4. The FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250 much higher than they were this time last year. This is just simply not happening, this disaster, Mr. Mayor, is it? I mean, you are in a position where you should basically promote and everything good about London. And I mean, I think that these are the sorts of things you should be highlighting, aren't they?
Oh, well, you got the question.
Yes, I always highlight good news as far as London is concerned, and I'll continue to do so. But one of the things I've got to make sure I do also is to make sure we're ready for the future. I simply haven't got the same optimism you have in relation to our chances of continuing to be the world's greatest city as the financial centre if we've left the single market, if we're not members of a customs union, if we can't attract talent. My job as the Mayor is to make sure the good things we have now continue in the future.
Mr. Mayor, the Chief Executive, Claire Hoey, of the new Centre for Iron Pacific in London said that actually London Centre is based on decades and decades, hundreds of years, actually, of being at the very centre because of the use of language, because of our legal system, because of all of these things. It's not because we're in the single market, Mr. Mayor. I mean, London's been around for 300 years as a city centre.
Can I just say, I agree with you in relation to our strengths. Look, the underlying strengths we have in relation to our legal system, best in the world. Our judges can't be corrupted. The strength we have with our language, where we are on the time zone in relation to GMT, the strength we had in relation to our students who come to London who leave with great experiences, the strength we have in relation to our diversity, something I know you like to talk about a lot, and the strength we have in relation to all these things aren't going to change when we leave the European Union. My job as the Mayor is to make sure the deal we do with the EU and the government does with the EU takes on board some of the advantages of being a member of the single market. For example, I'd make this point in relation to your assertion about things being bleak. One of the promises you made during the campaign was we'd get £250 million a week, which we could contribute towards the NHS. If you'd kept that promise, police would be well funded in London.
Come on. No, listen. First of all, that wasn't our claim. The whole lorries going around with that figure was nothing to do with us. That was vote leave. But anyway, this is really.
So we have a situation, Deputy Chairman, where those guys want nothing to do with Boris Johnson, and those guys want nothing to do with the Brexit campaign.
Listen, this is major displacement activity, Mr. Mayor. This is major.
Your party conference,
yes, exactly. Look, the fact is, Mr. Mayor, you said that the whole thing was going to come down like a pack of cards. It's not. The economic news is only getting better. And the fact is, I think that as in your position as Mayor, you have an absolute position. You have an absolute responsibility to actually highlight that, particularly with the rest of the world.
I think, Deputy.
Thanks very much. Time is up. The only thing about the pack of cards is that London is trumps. The next question. I thought that was rather good, and nobody applauded. The penultimate question is from Assembly Member Shah and relates to London skyline.
Thank you for your question. I've always been clear that I believe that tall buildings can make a positive contribution to a neighbourhood and to the city. Delivering the housing Londoners need while protecting London's green spaces requires more efficient use of the city's land. Tall buildings have a role to play in making optimal use of the capacity of some appropriate sites, but they're not the only way to provide the housing and employment space we need. Greater densities can at times be achieved through a range of building designs, including courtyard blocks and mid-rise buildings, as I'm sure Assemblymember Boff would agree. What is possible and appropriate will depend on the specifics of these sites, and as I've said before, while I'm the Mayor, the answer on tall buildings won't always be yes. In my new London plan, I'll be taking a more rigorous approach to ensuring new tall buildings are in appropriate sustainable locations, that they're safe, and that their full impacts are assessed. In consultation with local communities, the boroughs, through the local plans, will take greater responsibility for determining where tall buildings are an appropriate form of development based on a thorough evaluation of the existing character and context of individual areas. The visual, functional, environmental and cumulative impacts of tall buildings will be assessed in detail to determine if a tall building is acceptable on a particular site. The plan will make clear that all tall buildings must make a positive contribution at street level and to the skyline. It will also be clear that careful account must be taken of the way buildings relate to activities at ground floor level, as well as the effect they have on local daylight, wind turbulence, glare and noise. Proposals for tall buildings should expect the highest level of scrutiny and adhere to the most exacting standards. Every design for a tall building must be judged on its merits, its impact on surrounding communities, its impact on the skyline and particularly its safety features. Through a borough's local plan process, local people will be meaningfully involved in deciding where tall buildings are appropriate in the area and what scales they should be.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree substantially, probably wholly, with everything that you have said. Now, I'm pretty sure that you would acknowledge that the Skyline campaign has done a commendable amount of work and lobbying on issues related to tall buildings and London skyline. In their detailed response to your City for Londoners document, they said that study after study has demonstrated that often mid-rise designs can provide similar and even higher levels of densities than those achieved in tall buildings, something you again have alluded and accepted. Do you think that the London plan, which you are embarking upon, could contain a requirement that developers should consider alternative building configurations to demonstrate that they have that they could not achieve similar densities using mid-rise designs?
I think first, thank you for your comments. We had a conversation at last MQTs in relation to tall buildings, the Assembly and myself, and I made the point there, we can't have a one-size-fits-all. On some sites, subject to certain conditions being satisfied, a tall building will be appropriate. On other sides, it won't. I, for example, look around London and see evidence of high-density homes, good quality, that are not tall buildings. They're mid-rise, they use courtyards, they're very good quality. The most dense part of London is K&C. Mid-rise, courtyards, good quality. And so I don't subscribe to the view the only way to get high-density homes is via tall buildings. Horses for courses.
It's a question of, making sure that applicants or developers, when they put submissions, they do not simply translate high density as high-rise buildings.
Absolutely right.
And this is why this particular alternative configurations is important. And that leads to the next question, which is about evaluation, which also you sort of incorporated in the reply that you gave to my original question. Again, Skyline Campaign have recommended that all proposals for tall buildings should be subjected to independent design reviews at key stages of planning process, including pre-application stage. Now, and design review panels could also be useful for those design alternatives in terms of mid-rise for any proposals of high densities. Will you support such design panels in London Plan?
I'm very supportive of design panels. Most of the local authorities in London have them. Some, I'm afraid, don't. I want a situation where all local authorities have design review panels. I think they add value. I've got my own mayor's design advocates who will play an important role in relation to bigger designs. Obviously, I only consider those applications that are of a certain height or a certain size or a certain number of units. But I'm a big advocate of using the specialism of designers in relation to improving the quality. And it's important to get designers involved at an early stage. And you mentioned the pre-discussions, they're crucial.
Well, I think it's important what you said happens at local authority level as well, because not many authorities have that expertise, and this is why it is important that London Plan does actually require that such design panels are actually there to assess at local level planning applications. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And the final question is from Assemblymember Twycross on the government's new childcare scheme.
Thank you. On the 1st of September, the government increased the entitlement to free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds in England for working parents. In practice, this means that working parents can now access 1,140 hours of free childcare, often taken as 30 hours per week for 38 weeks of the year. It's too early to understand what the impact of this change will be in London. My officers will, of course, be monitoring take-up and seeking to understand the impact of the changes, particularly on the most disadvantaged families in the capital. There's already huge pressure on good childcare places in London, and parents in inner London pay 34% higher than the average for England. We also know that take-up of the previous 15-hour entitlement was lower in London than elsewhere in the country. In 2016, only 86% of 3- and 4-year-olds accessed their entitlement, compared to 95% nationally. I'm afraid at this moment, the thinking is that the childcare place shortages and high nursery running costs means this offer will be difficult to roll out in London. You'll probably have seen recent press quoting the Preschool Nursery Alliance survey, where almost 3/4 of childcare providers have said that the funding levels for the 30 hours offer do not cover the cost of providing a place. I'll continue to make the case to government, setting out what London needs, including the need for early years funding, which accurately reflects the cost of delivery.
Thank you. I think you'll agree that while additional support to parents must be welcomed, it also must be viable, as you indicate in your response. Last year, the London Assembly's Economy Committee heard serious concerns from childcare providers that the scheme would be unsustainable unless additional funding was made available to cover basic costs that they face in London. And in recent weeks, we've already heard of some nurseries closing ahead of the additional 3 hours coming into play, blaming the shortfall in funding from government that simply won't cover the additional cost. What reassurances have you sought or will you seek from government to make sure that we won't see valuable childcare places being lost in London as a result of this scheme?
Well, in addition to the concerns you've just expressed, the New Economics Foundation did a recent research which showed that nurseries will either pass on the extra cost to implement the 30 hours offer to parents, or cut services, as you said, or reduce workers' wages. Which is no good for anyone. So a number of things we're doing. One, I'll shortly be launching the funding application process to establish 3 early years hubs, which will bring together schools, childminders and private, voluntary and independent nurseries with the aim to improve access to quality early years education and childcare for the most disadvantaged families. And secondly, we've got to carry on lobbying the government in relation to the importance of having affordable childcare for this particular cohort. It helps the children in relation to their development, but also it helps the parents and carers to become economically active again, which is crucial if we're going to fulfil the potential of all Londoners.
Thank you for that update. As you'll be aware, parental employment is lower in London than other regions of the UK, and this appears largely to be down to the cost and availability of flexible childcare. It's a particular issue for people who work shifts or irregular hours. What specific measures will you be taking to help those in low-paid work or shift work, including those on zero-hours contracts, to access flexible, affordable childcare?
Well, I mean, the government's offer doesn't address that issue. It's simply the 30-hour offer. We've got very little statutory role in relation to this, and hardly any funding in relation to this. And anything we do is come from other budgets. One of the key reasons why I'm keen to bring forward the early years hubs is to bring together providers, experts, users to see what we can do. And when we have the rollout of the 3 hubs that I talked about, 3 early years hubs, one of the things we're hoping to do is address the issue of shifts you talk about. One of the reasons why, there are a number of reasons, one of the other reasons why I'm so keen to make sure people get decent remuneration for a decent day's work is so they can afford childcare. But we've got to bring down the cost of childcare. One of the reasons why I'm so keen to get from the government devolution of business rates is to see whether we could use business rates discounts to childcare providers to try and reduce the cost indirectly to parents and carers for childcare. But these are just some of the things we're talking about doing, but without the resources and the levers, it makes the ability for us to do that quite hard.
Would you like the responsibility to be devolved to you to deliver this sort of thing?
Absolutely, we could do a far, far better job than the DfE and the government do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That ends the question and answer session. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, for your answers. Can I please ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out in the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked. Thank you very much. Can I draw members' attention to the fact that this is the last meeting where Mr Williams gives sage advice to me and Jeanette Arnold, and from the next meeting, Rebecca Arnold will be giving us sage advice. Sager advice. Okay. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time, which will take place at 10 o'clock on Thursday the 12th of October 2017. Can I remind you that in Committee Room 4 at 1 o'clock we will be briefed on the Battersea Dogs Home. That ends the meeting. Thank you very much.
GLA Chamber